All right, let's testify tonight. Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has he done it for anyone else? I said, has he done it for anyone else? Cause the God that I serve, he's always at work. Has he done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it out. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift him high. Come on, testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing that. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
Hey guys, hope you are well this morning. Anybody that is lurking out there, anybody that joins us later, welcome. And you may have guessed by the name of the stream today. This is something I've talked about a little bit before, of course, but it's also something that I ponder every now and then when I'm just feeling contemplative about things, which is the idea of, is there any argument for atheism? That is not necessarily an argument that, oh, I think a talking snake in a garden is ridiculous, or I think that water turning into wine is impossible, or a guy walking on water is impossible, that kind of stuff. Nor even questions like the problem of evil. While the problem of evil is a much more interesting objection to certain theological stands, it really does not argue for atheism. It only argues about the traits that God may or may not have. That if the problem of evil was a little more sound, it would only demonstrate that you cannot have a God that is both all powerful and all loving. The problem is that that is demonstrably false with a little bit of critical thinking. But basically, what ends up happening with arguments like the problem of evil is that since it is not an argument based on empirical fact, that is, things that you can observe and replicate and test, and instead it's based on logic and reason, so people can simply say, you're wrong, and that ends up being the entirety of their discussion. Even though they may flower it with all sorts of great language, that's really what it usually boils down to in the end. And that goes to both sides. This is not just a criticism of the atheists out there. Christians tend to do that as well. When atheists bring up any kind of argument that is not based on empiricism, but based on logic, reason, etc., and rather than answer it with logic and reason, we just tend to go, you're wrong. And so I'm not saying I'm perfect at this, because obviously I'm not. But, I want to at least try to approach some of these atheist objections with, a serious dose of logic and critical thinking and reason and nothing else, right? Not throwing my own personal beliefs in there or anything like that. But, and then how to tackle some atheist argumentation with that. So I start watching various videos with prominent atheists to see what are the great objections, or what are the big arguments for atheism, or at least an argument against theism, not just against the Christian God or against some piece of doctrine, but actually against theism as a whole. And then I came to the conclusion that really isn't one. Not that, at least not a solid one that I could find. And I find that interesting, that ultimately, and before, if there's any atheists out there that listen to me at all, let me say this. The burden of proof argument that many atheists try to put forth is not an argument, it is a refusal to argue. The burden of proof argument is simply trying to say, oh, I don't need to prove my point because you need to convince me. As if, for some reason, the atheist is the standard by which everybody else must then, approach and try to convince otherwise. Like, atheism is the default setting, and therefore any and all arguments must be enough to overcome the presupposition of atheism. But I think that ultimately what we should be doing is avoiding any presuppositions at all. And this is something that we all as humans struggle to do. We truly do, because we all have our biases, we all have our beliefs, and we all have a tendency to throw away arguments based on that. And if you'll excuse me, I will be right back, because I hear the dogs are a little upset. So here, listen to the wonderful music for just a minute. I will be back in just a moment.
All right, let's testify tonight. Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. I will tell the word of the hope I have found. For my body was broken.
Okay, sorry about that. Just wanted to make sure the dogs were okay. Capring gets a little bullied sometimes by the other dog and the cat, so I want to make sure she, yes, I'm talking about you, I know. All right, so anyway, Robert, first in the chat today says shalom, 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 Robert. I hope that you are well, my friend. So yeah, I'm curious. I mean, if any of you guys have heard what you think is, it may not, I mean, obviously, if you're a Christian, it may not have convinced you that atheism is true, but have you at least heard a genuine argument for atheism that I could sink my teeth into, so to speak, intellectually? Because I want to. I need to get back in the habit of making videos. I haven't been doing it for a long time, obviously. And as such, I know that many of you, have stopped watching the channel because you're waiting for me to do something, and then I don't do it, and you're like, okay, screw this guy. And I can totally understand why you would do that. But I want to, on this channel, at least try to start tackling real things that are out there in the atheism world. And I wanted to start with what are the best arguments for atheism and kind of tackle them one at a time. But if there are no arguments for atheism, how do you do that? Well, here we are. Robert says, I'm doing okay. Hopefully you and your family are doing well. So, well, we're doing as good as we can, Robert. Tired as usual. Thanks to the constant trying to work enough to pay the bills, but never quite getting enough to actually pay all the bills. You know, always getting close enough to where we don't lose everything, but never really getting things paid off. That's the status of my life right now. Now if somebody wants to donate $129,000-ish, $149,000 plus tax, then I would be able to just not even worry about it, and I'd be able to live on Social Security. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. And let's see, a little crazy political wise here in South Carolina with Lindsey Graham's death. By next month on the 13th, they're going to have a special election. I don't really seem like enough time. Well, that's the thing. It's the same thing. Like, I know that some people, and I think it was an unfair argument, by the way. Well, I did not support Kamala Harris, obviously. Some people criticized her in that she was never elected. Well, you don't have time to go through the full process when your candidate drops out just a couple of months before the election. You do not have time to organize another set of primaries and everything in all 50 states in order to properly elect Kamala Harris versus any other opposition that was out there. So I think that was an unfair thing. when a person dies, and by the way, and don't get me wrong, this is not a dig on Lindsey Graham in particular or any other specific politician, but I do not think that people should be serving in office for 30, 40, 50 years. I think that kind of thing is insane because, I'm sorry. When was the last time Lindsey Graham actually went to a grocery store and pulled out his own wallet, paid for it with his own money, and actually had to stop and consider if this stuff fit in his budget? Has he ever had to do that? And I don't think I think that these guys, you know, it should not be a career. It should be something you do for a few years, and then you're done. And the only position in the only elected position in the federal government that I think should have a retirement package is president of the United States, because once you become president, then you become a public figure for life, and so you will need things like Secret Service and stuff like that to protect you for the rest of your life. I'm okay with that, but I am not okay with, I don't know how long was, let's find out. And got too many things going on here, so let's see. Okay. How long was Lindsey Graham a senator? Let's see. Lindsey Graham served as senator in South Carolina for over 23 years, from January 3rd, 2003, until his death, a few days ago. And let's see. But what about, let's see. But he was also in the House of Representatives. Trying to see, he was elected in 1995, 1992. Let's see. Oh, that's the South Carolina House. Okay, so the U.S. House. So he was also in the United States House of Representatives from January 1995 until 2003, when he was elected to the Senate. Then he was in the South Carolina House of Representatives from 1992 to 1994. And I don't know. I let me see. So he was 71 when he died, right? So let's see. We have. Why does this happen? I need to fix that. Let's see. 2026 minus 94. So let's see. That's 32 years in office, or roughly half his life. And by the way, he is not by any stretch one of the longest serving senators or anything. But 32 years since he was not in elected office. I don't know. I question whether or not that's wise, as far as all that's concerned. All right, so Jules says Russell's teapot. I assume it's an argument. I don't know the formal argument for Russell's teapot, if there is one. So let me look it up real quick and see if I can find something just real fast. Russell's teapot is a philosophical analogy created by Bertrand Russell. It states that the burden of proof for any unfalsifiable claim. That's just the burden of proof argument. Well, you may not have been here, Jeffrey, but I already said the burden of proof argument is not an argument. And it's, I'm sorry that, and let me see. Russell originally introduced this thought experiment in 1952 essay, Is There a God?, to challenge religious dogma. He argued that it is absurd to ask the skeptics to disprove unprovable claims, like the existence of a deity or an invisible teapot orbiting the sun between Earth and Mars. If you were to assert such a claim without evidence, no rational person would believe him simply because the claim cannot be proven wrong. Now, here's the problem with that general argument and that general line of argumentation. Is the idea of asserting something that cannot be disproven without evidence. Well, first of all, you cannot you may not be able to disprove the existence of God, but what you can do is disprove the evidence. Rather than just pretend, and this is what atheists tend to do these days, rather than just pretend that there is no evidence, why don't we take a look at the evidence that there is and attempt to look at that with a critical eye? So, for example, one of the arguments that I found very compelling when I was an atheist is the prime mover or first cause argument, which is basically, in a nutshell, that everything, everything that happens in the universe happens with a cause. Now, you can look at that from like Newton's laws of motion, and the idea that any given object, and you guys, if you've ever taken, even elementary school physics know this, any given object that is at rest will stay at rest until it's acted upon by another object. And any object that is in motion will stay in that same motion until it is acted upon by an outside object. In other words, I think a better way to state it than even in Newton's, because Newton was specifically talking about motion, but I'm trying to be a little more general. I would say, so Crawford's general theory of change is as follows: anything and everything that changes state has a cause, or anything and everything is in a state that will not change unless acted upon by an exterior source. Now, that state can be a lot of different things: size, shape, temperature, motion, etc. And so, but any of those things can change depending on what the thing is we're talking about. So there may be some things that can't change size, but they can certainly change temperature or color or whatever. There are other things that can't change, say color, but they could change size, or they could change. You get the idea. But nothing changes its current state unless acted upon by something outside of it. So, for example, if you have let me find something lying around here. Okay, so here's just like a little widget. This is a little thing I 3D printed. It's part of a stand for a model. And you get 5 nerd points if you can identify what this stand is for, or at least what franchise it's for. All right, so this, let's just say that this is currently, sitting at 72 degrees Fahrenheit as far as its temperature. Assuming that it is in a room that has an ambient temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's no radiation acting upon it, it will simply stay at 72 degrees Fahrenheit forever, right? But if this is acted upon by external forces, in other words, like if the temperature around it is increased or decreased, and or if there is radiant heat projected to it, then that will change its temperature. But it cannot change its temperature on its own. Nothing, nothing can change its current state by itself. And then if you look at the universe, people argue, and I get it, a lot of people don't really understand Big Bang Theory because it's a lot more complicated than just there was a tiny point and it exploded into the universe. That's not really, when you deal with expansion, not explosion, and some of the repercussions of that and how it all works. It's not that simple, but what you could say is that the universe was in a dense, uniform state, and it then expanded into something akin to what we see today. Which means, in order for it to have changed its state, then something had to act upon it. That to me is a great argument for the existence of God, because you can then get into philosophical and logical arguments about the necessary attributes of whatever would act upon this universe in order to cause the universe to change its state. And then you can talk about creation itself, whether the universe actually was created, or are you going to argue that the universe is eternal, and how are you going to support that? So I think that it would be more fruitful for an atheist to try to come up with a logical reason why the universe itself doesn't need a creator, than to try to argue that, oh, I don't have a burden of proof because I'm not making a positive claim, you see. Well, actually, you are making a positive claim. It's just that your positive claim is that that the universe was not created by a god or gods. And while you might say, well, try to argue the semantics of, well, I cannot prove something that is, a negative because I'm trying to prove that something did not happen. I think what you can do is you could remove all of the evidence to the contrary. Think like a lawyer, because, the whole idea of saying burden of proof is not my problem is thinking like a lawyer. So let's really think like a lawyer and actually try to discredit the evidence that Christians bring to the table if you want to actually have an interesting and fruitful argument, as opposed to arguments that really amount to, I don't like God because he does bad things in the Bible, or I don't like God because I think the idea is just, silly, and so poo-poo, You are annoying sometimes to bring. Can't let her, I'd rather she sat on my lap, but she wants to sit up here because reasons. All right, so anyway, that's Russell's Teapot is, to me, probably the weakest argument out there, in that it's the burden of proof argument is simply not an argument. It's an avoidance to argue. Let's see. Get everything set up and going for the cat. Yeah, as far as the situation with Lindsey Graham. Well, it sucks, but it happens sometimes. And Musk's orbiting roller coaster. Well, I haven't heard that one. Just like our governor appointing Lindsey Graham's sister to temporarily fill a Senate seat, she has no political experience either. What could go wrong? I do not like that kind of nepotism. Same thing with Erica Kirk taking over Turning Point. I think is disgusting. What has she earned that position? Or is this, just DEI, or something? Why is Erica Kirk in charge of that organization? What are her skills that she brings to the table? Certainly not great oratory skills, but, hey, to each their own. Since I've been in South Carolina, never voted for Graham. Always the Republican person running against him. He was a neocon, after all. I don't like the neocon label. because I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean exactly, other than they're Republicans that I don't like. So I don't know who is and isn't a neocon in people's minds, but I choose to look at each person with their own merits. I also found out a few days ago that John Saxon moved to the city you live in before his death and died there. Perhaps you could visit his grave sometime. I had no idea. John Saxon moved to Murfreesboro. Did not know that. And Street Picture of the Morning, is that Stargate? No, my friend. It was actually Battlestar Galactica. Let's see. John Saxon was in a lot of sci-fi stuff. That is very true. And so, yes. Wasn't he in Battle Beyond the Stars? I think he was. One of my favorite cheesy movies of all time. Let's see. Hi, I recently saw a list saying Tennessee was the worst. List saying Tennessee was the worst city in the states. Well, Tennessee is not a city, but I assume what you meant was Tennessee is the worst state in the United States. The funny thing about those kind of rankings is it's sometimes hard to rank an entire state as far as how it ranks as far as good or bad to move to. For example, if I was to say, hey, you want to move to California, you might say, oh my God, no, I can't stand the heat. Or, you might say, oh, heck no, I don't want to live in that super expensive real estate. But you're forgetting that California is more than San Francisco and Los Angeles. There are parts like Fort Dick, California. Look it up, real place. Beautiful country and nothing like Los Angeles, right? Weed, California. Beautiful little town nestled in the mountains right near the Oregon border. Absolutely beautiful. Love it there. So California is not just San Francisco and Los Angeles. That being said, I also, so with Tennessee, Memphis, Tennessee, which is the largest city in Tennessee, is also the city with the highest crime rate in the entire country. But while Memphis, Tennessee is pretty darn bad, other cities like Murfreesboro, Nashville, Sevierville, Gatlinburg, now I forget, Chattanooga, all these other cities, wonderful places to live. And so, but how, do you have to take the Memphis into account when you're rating the state? I don't know. That doesn't seem fair. And let's see. Not sure what the criteria was worst to live. I don't know. But, I don't like those kind of rankings. Because usually the criteria is based on a political ideology that the person who wrote the article holds. So if a conservative is writing a list of best places to live, they're going to find places that have conservative politics and beliefs as a positive, where if the person is liberal, quite the opposite. Let's see. Tennessee was named the absolute worst state to live in by 2026 by CNBC in its annual America's Top States for Business study, scoring just 64 out of 290 possible points. State received an F. Well, good for them. And CNBC, yes, think about it. CNBC rated Tennessee one of the most conservative states, a very solid red state. Marsha Blackburn was our state senator who was, she had a difficult time talking into the microphone because her mouth usually had President Trump's penis in it. But Now she is running for governor of Tennessee because Governor Lee is I don't know if he's term limiting out or he's just stepping down, but Governor Lee will no longer be governor, so wants to take the job, and she will probably win, much to my chagrin. I do not like these hardline MAGA Republicans. So, oh my gosh, you have one of the most conservative states in the country, and a liberal news outlet says it's a crappy place to live. I wonder why. Yes, John was a villain in Battle Beyond the Stars. Pseudo Emperor Palpatine mixed with a little Darth Vader. Yes. I guess business study is pretty specific. Well, the thing is that like if you're to look at Memphis, and you would say, oh yeah, Tennessee's a horrible place to take your business. But if you're to look at the Nashville area, look, In-N-Out Burger, which they're not the biggest corporation, but they're a significant chain, fast food chain on the West Coast. They just moved their entire corporate operations to Tennessee, to Franklin specifically, which is in the Nashville area. And why did they do it? Because Tennessee is a lot friendlier to businesses. Must put a Tesla Roadster car in orbit. Yeah, I remember that. But, that's obviously not an argument for atheism. Yet South Carolina's fastest growing state in America, our roads and so forth need a lot of work. Oh, the roads here are terrible, because unfortunately here in Middle Tennessee, we've doubled the population in the last 10 years, and the roads are way behind. And so if you're not already, South Carolina's gonna have that problem in a couple of years. Old sci-fi time. How about good old space 1999? Oh, I love me some space. The Eagles, man. The Eagles were some of the best designed spaceships in sci-fi. Even though, obviously in a straight up fight, they would lose to pretty much everybody. In fact, I may have to throw them into the mix of all the different ships I want to compare. Throw the Eagles in there. But if Moonbase Alpha launched its entire wing of Eagle spacecraft, I don't think they could take out a shuttlecraft from Star Trek: The Original Series. Let's see. People moving here to South Carolina need to know and understand we are a stand your ground state. Hey, good for you. Knock yourself out, or kill anybody who breaks into your house, whatever. I personally, I think stand your ground laws can be very easily abused, and so I am not in favor of them. At least not the way they're used typically. So really, nobody's got an argument for atheism. Nobody. Come on, somebody's got to have something. Because like I said, Russell's Teapot is not an argument for atheism. It's just a statement that I don't need to argue because I don't have anything to prove. And you know what? You can't prove. The concept, the God concept, is something that cannot be proven or disproven, and both sides generally will quickly agree to that. So I get really tired of people arguing about proof of God's existence, as if you have proof of anything that you deal with in your life. You don't, because newsflash, even in the strictest, most scientific settings on planet Earth, the only time that you see anything that is considered proof is mathematics. And even then, the mathematics do not prove that a theory is correct. The mathematics only show that the theory is logically consistent and can make predictions. And so, and the mathematical proof is that the equations work, right? However, the you cannot. So even with something as well tested and well regarded as, say, relativity, say we're talking about, say, general relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, and you're looking at one of his equations from it. The only thing those equations prove is that whatever element of the theory you're testing, let's say time dilation, that you can get very consistent predictions as to how much time dilation you will get, and then you can test it, assuming you can move at some fraction of the speed of light or get close to a large gravitational object, and have a control group that is not moving and is not near a big gravitational source. Then you can start to test things and see if the predictions that relativity make are in fact accurate. But you can't say, "Oh, I've proven relativity to be true." You haven't. You've only shown that what you can measure in the real world is consistent with general relativity. Let's see. And let me see here. Robert put into the special question chat, and yes, questions put in there, they need to be theological in nature, but they'll always get top priority, which is why I'll get back to the regular chat in a minute. But Robert says, Solid Tracker, just like this morning, I was watching Amazing Facts church program. He said that from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years passed. From Abraham to Christ, another 2,000 years had passed. Okay? I don't see how that's a question. Maybe I'm missing something. So I'll give you some time. You know what to bring? I'm sorry, you're just going to have to sit down here. No, just relax, okay? I'm sorry. Let's see. Make you think, right? Star Trek had war, Star Wars had war, but so many sci fi fans out there are utterly scientific, aka no guns. Well, Star Wars actually had surprisingly little war in it, but Star Trek had the Dominion War. But you think about it over the entire and well, I guess you count the Klingon War from Discovery, season 1. But that's really about it as far as major war that they've actually depicted, and even then the Klingon War was barely depicted. Honestly, the Dominion War is the only war we really spent any real time getting into. Oh, and let's see. Robert, let me. Well, I'll go back to your question about guns in a minute. But you went to after you talked about the fact that, according to this pastor, there was 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years from Abraham to Christ. Do you think that timetable is correct? I don't think anybody really knows. And I don't think it's relevant, to be honest. Because if it were relevant, I think that it would be mentioned that it's relevant. I don't think that the Bible is like intentionally hiding things that are necessary. So it may be true that there were 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham and 2,000 years from Abraham to Christ. And interestingly enough, 1,991 years roughly from Christ's death to today. So in about 9 years, we'll hit the 2000th anniversary of Christ's death and resurrection. It'll be interesting to see if something special happens on that particular date. But I don't think that it's of any significance that there was roughly 2,000 years between Adam and Abraham, and another 2,000 years between Abraham and Christ. Maybe that's just the way God likes to do it, is to do things every 2,000 years. Or maybe he did it on purpose for some deeper reason, but then forgot to mention it in the Bible itself. Let's see here. Oh, and I believe he's trying to set a timetable for the return of Christ. That's what it sounds like. Because if you say, okay, 2,000 years from Abraham, the way if I were trying to be a sensationalist about it, I would look at, hey, look, we've had 2,000 years from Adam to okay, check, check. Looks like we got it now. All right, thank you. Checkity check, check. Should be working. All right, thank you guys for letting me know, and hopefully I wasn't gone for too awful long. All right, so back to the constitutional carry issue. So if on the one hand, as if you're a constitutional purist, the Second Amendment is very important for the safety and security of the people of the United States, and therefore all people should basically you should have the right to keep and bear arms unless that right is specifically taken away from you. The problem is, how does the gun shop know if they've been taken away from you? Well, you can set up a very simple and quick query to some kind of database. Rather than a full-on background check, it should just check to see your gun status. And I think that it would be fair for them to right now make a database, just parallel it to the Social Security database that shows anybody who is not qualified to own a firearm. And why would somebody not be qualified to own a firearm? Well, let's say they committed a violent felony, or they, you know, basically committed a gun crime. So there are circumstances that where your gun rights will be revoked. However, you know, a gun license not being required. Okay, so then how do you know if somebody has violated the law? If there's nothing to produce to prove that you have not, like, for, the reason, part of the reason you show the cop your driver's license is so, which it is proof, or at least evidence that you are legally qualified and you have the legal right to operate a motor vehicle. A gun license would be the same thing, except having to do with you have the legal right to own and carry a firearm. And I don't see that as particularly controversial. In fact, I would go so far as to just make gun ownership a endorsement on your driver's license, similar to if you get a motorcycle endorsement or something like that. So you just go down to the DMV and you say, "Hey, I want to get a gun endorsement on my driver's license." You let the DMV do a background check on you. They give you the gun endorsement. And then when you go to a gun shop, you can simply show your driver's license with the proper gun endorsement on it. They can verify your driver's license. By the way, verifying your driver's license takes about as much time as scanning a can of coffee at the grocery store self-check. So they would just scan your license. It would pop into the database, verify that you do indeed have a valid license that also gives you guarantees that you have the right to keep and bear arms because you are a citizen in good standing without any major problems like mental illness or some kind of criminal history that would disqualify you from owning a firearm. And therefore, you can have all the firearms you want on the property. And I don't care if you have, if you decide to get your, firearm endorsement or whatever you want to call it for your license. Once you do that, you have several good, you have different paths, let's say, to where you can get everything the way you want it to be. But I'm rambling, so let's just move on, shall we? Hence why they say science doesn't deal with faith. But science does deal with faith all the time. Another common misconception about science is that it is faithless. Many famous scientists, like Richard Dawkins, love to boast about the idea that they don't believe in faith. And they will then mischaracterize faith as being belief without evidence. That is not what faith means. And so, the belief without evidence, while the word faith is in there, that is what's called blind faith. And blind faith is not what faith in Christ is meant to be. If blind faith was what Christ intended, then people like Thomas would never have been allowed to have been one of the 12 apostles. Oh, and I do see that Marianor put into the question chat a theological question. So let's see what it is. If animals never go to heaven, would that constitute a hypothetical argument on the atheist side, or maybe not? I don't know. I mean, I don't think so, because if you want to make a case based on the idea of animals going to heaven, and maybe like how unfair is it that animals might suffer and die a horrible death and not be rewarded in the afterlife, or something to that effect, I don't know exactly how that works as far as animals are concerned, but I don't think that God created them just to die here on this planet and with no other purpose. Hope that answers your question. All right, so back to the main chat where we were dealing with science, not dealing with faith. It says, at most, it deals with fate, and even then, it is uncertain to a point. And that's where the audio cut out, just making sure that the audio is still going. Yes, it is. All right, so again, I think that the problem with this line of thinking is that it mischaracterizes what faith is. Faith is not simply believing in something despite the fact that you have overwhelming evidence that it is not true. That is a delusion. And that is one of the central theses of the God Delusion, the book by Richard Dawkins, in that he believes that there's all this evidence that God does not exist, and yet we believe in him anyway, and therefore we are delusional. And I would say this, if there was a ton of evidence out there that Christianity is false, then you might be able to make some kind of claim there. The problem is that as far as the physical evidence, you can either suggest that there's simply not enough physical evidence to warrant a conclusion, or that the evidence is ambiguous, or that the evidence leans towards, well, yes, it's true. And I happen to think that the evidence overall leans towards the case that Jesus is, in fact, real, that he really existed, that I think that the archaeological evidence is plain, that almost every site mentioned in the Bible is an actual place. I think that the sociological and testimonial evidence is overwhelming in favor of the idea that at the very least, a group of people some 2,000 years ago saw a man tortured to death by the government, and then 3 days later they swear that he rose from the dead. Now, you can make the case that they didn't really see him rise from the dead. I'm sure there's a million different cases for that right now, but I do not think that it is possible to make a decent case that they didn't believe that he rose from the dead. I think that you absolutely can. The idea that he rose from the dead is probably, or the idea that people believe that he rose from the dead is probably one of the most sound and solid facts of all of history. And in fact, one thing that's very interesting is, we have more contemporaneous information on Jesus than any other person in the ancient world, and yet we have so many atheists out there that try to scream that there's no evidence and that it's not contemporaneous and that the Gospels were all anonymous and all these other things that are just factually untrue. And and I know that it's an overused sentiment, but it is so true. Look, you can have your own opinions, but you cannot have your own facts. And when you start saying stuff like trying to make the argument that Jesus didn't exist, or something like that, the evidence overwhelmingly is against you. However, all that being said, that's even if you could show a ton of evidence that Jesus himself never existed, is that an argument against the existence of God or just an argument against Christianity? Let's see. DMV woke, sure, give me a year. Let's see. I think you allowed your own gun to DMV worker. It seems computer's down. Maybe you can come in next week. Talking about the gun thing. Street Preacher says, you got that over there, Stan. Does Christianity, depending on believing in humans, are somehow more worthy Does Christianity depend on believing humans are somehow more worthy than other animals? I think that that's phrasing it in an odd way, but let me try to actually tackle that one, Stan. Yes and no. As a, I mean, because if you were to just compare man physically to any other creature, does man seem to have more worth than a chimpanzee or an elephant or anything else? Maybe not on the surface, but of all the things on earth, only man was created in God's image. And only man, like in the book of Genesis, God said, that it's good over and over and over. The only time that he said it's very good was after he created man. Look, I think that, yes, man has a higher value than animals because man was created in the image of God. It doesn't mean that God is an incredibly huge biped with 10 fingers and 10 toes, and 2 eyes, nose, and mouth, and all that stuff. I'm not suggesting that. Instead, I'm just suggesting that God is, you know, I think that I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say. Sorry. I think that when we're made in the image of God, it's more in the way that we process information, that we're rational beings, we're logical beings, that we we have emotion that follows a certain pattern. And if you look at God over the course of his time within our temporal universe, interacting with man, you can see God's aging process, if you will. But you will never see the end of God's aging process. Yes, I know, T'Preen. You just really want to stay up here. Let's see. Beat 2 Slide 2 says atheism is full of hypocrisy and contradictions. Well, unfortunately, so is Christianity. So I'm not going to sit here and throw shade at either side. I just want a real argument. So, look, as far as throwing shade, look, Christians have got nothing to be proud of in that department because Christians have been just as bad as atheists as far as their behavior online over the years. And I've contributed to that, so I have to eat my humble pie sometimes. But I don't think that in and of itself disqualifies atheism just because atheists can be hypocrites and contradict each other, because so can Christians. All you got to do, because look, if I say something on my channel that I believe is a fundamental truth, then there's going to be someone on YouTube that'll see that as somehow totally blasphemy. And so when I open the door, then it pours down soap and all that and starts to try to scrub. That probably didn't make a lot of sense. Because dogs don't go to heaven. Well, we don't know. The honest truth is what happens to animals is not mentioned in the Bible at all. And so I don't think that it's fair to draw any solid conclusions as to whether or not animals can go to heaven or whether they are condemned to hell or whether they just cease to exist when they die. The truth is we do not know. So, maybe we'll find out, on the other side of this life. Maybe all the animals get reincarnated or resurrected just like the masters do, which means that now not only do you have your family to contend with, but every dog and cat that you've ever owned in your life. If you've ever been on a farm, all the sheep, the pigs, the goats, the cows, all that. Just going to be a mess. Just us more evolved monkeys. Well, actually, remember, humans are not monkeys. We are apes, if you want to get technical. Monkeys have tails. Apes do not. So we are more like the chimpanzee or the silverback than we are like the spider monkey or something like that. Yes, you hear them? Yes, I know. I don't think even chimps are evolved enough for heaven. Why not? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they deserve it or don't deserve it, but if you put a chimp in paradise, I'm sure it'll be perfectly happy. Isaac Newton was a Christian, probably the best one of the best scientists also. Well, Isaac Newton, he was a Christian, but he was also an alchemist, which is a pseudoscience. And I don't remember, I think he was into astrology as well. But so he believed in some really, he created some of the most basic principles by which we follow to this day. Not to mention mathematics that we still use. Calculus was Newton's invention. It's one thing to be able to master doing calculus. Imagine being the person who invented it. Just because we didn't have a mathematical system to calculate orbits. And so he's like, okay, I can come up with that. Give me a minute. And then 13 months later, he came back and they said, wow, man, it's been a while. I said, yeah, but check it out. This is called calculus. And now you can calculate the orbits of planets. Ta-da. Let's see. Does it depend on a human being special among the animals? Guess the story of the Bible. Yeah. Yes, humans are created in the image of God. But as far as, like I said, the status of animals, the Bible does not address it. And so I'm not going to say, oh, animals don't go to heaven. But I'm not going to say, oh, animals do go to heaven. Because the Bible is silent on that issue. And the Bible is silent on it. It basically is telling me it's not that important. But even if, I may be really curious if I'm going to see, my childhood pets again in heaven. And maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know how that works. So we'll find out, hopefully later, but, sometime. We are special, created, or chosen, created, yes. Yes, an atheist teaches that we are animals. Well, yes, atheists believe that humans are just a slightly more evolved ape. And I can kind of understand where their position comes from. I disagree with it, obviously. But however, not in the way that many Christians would want me to. I am not a young Earth creationist. For that you'll have to talk to, Mr. Know-It-All or something, because I think he is. But I am not a young Earth creationist. I am. I believe that the universe is probably on the order of 14 billion years old, and then as far as evolution is concerned, I think that the problem with the theory of evolution is not that we evolved from animals so that we have a common ancestor with modern day apes. I think the problem is more the idea that mutation is random. I think that a better word would be unpredictable. And let's see, Stan says, doesn't it preclude evolution, made in God's image, not evolved into God's image, evolving from monkeys? Well, again, apes, not monkeys, but if, you're right that it says that, made in God's image is how it's put. which kind of describes, squishing around in the mud until you make something that works. And that's kind of the way it describes it, that he was mucking around in the mud, and then he made Adam, and then he took a rib out of Adam, and he mucked around in the mud with that rib, and he made Eve. And then he said, okay, go make a bunch of kids. I'll see you later. And God disappeared. Then Adam and Eve went and planted the trees, and the rest is history. I didn't say that. I really am tired, you can tell. Sometimes I get into rambling stuff. Atheists all seem to believe that animals have morals. Okay, so I think that when it comes to that kind of thing, they'll use examples like if you can see video footage of, say, elephants mourning the death of one of their own, or trying to protect an elephant that's in danger or something like that. And other apes doing the same thing, where I don't know what you call a group of apes, so the herd or the tribe or whatever it is rally to protect some innocent that is being threatened in some way, right? And that's all fine and dandy. The problem with ascribing actual morals to it is that morals or moral actions are hard to in order to know that someone is doing something based on morality, you simply have to ask them. And you can't ask an ape that kind of question. You can't get that kind of information from the ape. So we'll never know with any certainty whether or not the ape is doing something simply because their instincts say to go over there and help, or that the help was coming from within because one of them could jump that far or something. PETA, don't be cruel to our food, says Stan. Oh, I don't believe in being cruel to food, but I do believe in PETA, people eating tasty animals. I'm a card-carrying member. Cows are people too. Well, maybe so, but they're delicious people. We are all cannibals then, or at least the meat eaters. Well, call me a cannibal then. Although, no, here's the problem with that, is that a cannibal is specifically a creature that eats its own species. And so there are cannibalistic animals out there. Say the praying mantis is a great example. But the truth is that, as far as I know, we don't know of any actual cannibal type species of animals. Let's see. Robert says, just like a couple of weeks ago, I got my driver's license renewed here in South Carolina. I'm not a fan of the new design. Your picture is pretty much colorless. Oh, yeah, my picture of my new driver's license, I can barely see it. I do not like it at all. Made your picture much larger, and the new license design here also. Yeah, like I said, the license here in Tennessee is, overall, I don't hate the design of the license, making sure that I'm not exposing any information here. But yeah, the picture on the license is terrible. You can see that. But yeah, it's very washed out. I know it's a little blurry, but I guess you can tell that's me. But man, you really have to be looking to see that it's me. All right, hold on. I'll be right back. Spring wants to get out now.
All right, let's testify tonight. Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet, and I could stay here forever.
Okay, let's see if we can stay awake now. There's my new license plates here. Have a barcode on them now. I haven't seen that. It's probably just because you don't see color. I'm talking about the picture. Okay. Let's see. At most, the Bible something about two animals. At most, the Bible says something about the two animals on the ark, right? Not now the unicorn, though. Last time there were special ones, it went really. Last time there were special ones, it went really well. Okay. I First of all, because I know like one thing people complained about is that two of each species of animal would never fit on Noah's Ark. And now, if you were to make the argument, now let me just say this: I don't know if the story of Noah's Ark is literal or allegory or metaphor or what. Okay, I genuinely don't know. And not being a archaeologist or a geologist or any of that, I'm not going to sit there and speculate about the potential evidence for some kind of worldwide catastrophic flood or whether or not the ark could physically even exist or whatever. I'm not interested in those kind of arguments because the thing is that if in fact you keep in mind God was directly involved with Noah at the time that he built the ark. So if God wanted to make sure that the ark stayed together during the storm, he could do that himself. He didn't have to just depend on Noah's craftsmanship. And as far as the animals going into the ark two by two, there were actually different numbers of animals depending upon the type of animal. Of all the clean animals, they actually had 7 breeding pairs. And so that means that no, there were not 2 cows, right? There were actually 14 of them, 7 male, 7 female. And then and they entered the ark 2 by 2. They were all paired up, of course. And after they departed the ark, they became the progenitors of every cow that exists today. But what I think is that we forget that, we've got to take evolution into account. Is it possible that there were not 2 of every species of animal that exists on Earth today, or even 2 of every species that existed on Earth back then? What if it was just 2 of every general type of animal? So you don't necessarily have to have 2 cows. Well, let's say 14 because you had 7 breeding pairs. So 14 cows, 14 bison, 14 buffalo, 14 of every type of elk, 14 of, basically you take every bovine creature and 14 of them, right? Or maybe you just had 14 of some kind of generic bovine, and they went out and reproduced and mutated and spread out all over the world and became all the different bovine creatures that are out there today, including, of course, the common cow, but also including the buffalo and the bison and all the other things out there, right? I think that's possible. And so that way that you didn't need quite as many animals as some people would think. But yeah, so I don't think there were necessarily as many animals as people believe on the ark, and I don't necessarily believe that the animal. Well, and I think it's demonstrably true if you read the Bible that assuming the ark was literal, then there was not simply 2 of each kind. There were 14 of every clean animal. Let's see. The last time there were special. Oh, and you mentioned the unicorns. Okay, so let me tell you something about unicorns. Do I believe in unicorns? Yes, I do. Do you believe? You. Do you believe in unicorns? And before you type something like, of course not, Salty, I am a rational human being. Before you start typing something like that, I will submit to you that you do, in fact, believe in unicorns. The problem is you don't know what a unicorn is. You're thinking about a horse with a horn on it, like you see in, the Legend with Tom Cruise or The Last Unicorn or whatever. That's not a unicorn, my friend. That is a horse with a horn on it. And that is a mythological creature that does not, and as far as we know, has not ever existed. However, the actual unicorn is a single horned rhinoceros, or the Indian rhinoceros. And if you know anything about animals, you know that they are broken down in various groups. In Latin, they get their species name, and some of them, of course, are just ridiculous to try to pronounce, right? But that's where we get like humans are Homo sapien, right? And as opposed to Homo erectus and Homo habilis and all that. And those are all Latin terms to be somewhat descriptive about what these creatures were capable of. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so with the unicorn. So if you look up today, the Latin term for rhinoceros, there are two different listings in the Latin for rhinoceros. For the species, there are two subspecies. There is the rhinoceros bicornis, which is what we call the African rhino, and then the rhinoceros unicorn, which is what we call the Indian rhino. And the difference is the bicornis, as you might gather from the name, and if you know anything about Latin, the bicornis has two horns, while the unicorn has one. And so if you were to say unicorn to somebody back when, like in the Bible, the first time the actual word unicorn appeared in the Bible was when the first King James was published. Because prior to that, I don't remember what, I don't know what the actual word that was translated to unicorn is, but before that, you would have had to have, read the actual language or whatever before the first. Well, actually, not before King James. I think unicorn probably existed in there because it was in the Septuagint, if I remember correctly, which is the earliest translation of the Old Testament to Latin. Let's see. Was the Septuagint written? And the Septuagint was written. Come on, waiting for the good old Google to tell me. Yeah. So somewhere around 250 BC. And so a little bit before the time of Christ, the term unicorn was being used to describe the single horn rhinoceros. Robert says, though in Revelation it does say Christ is going to return on a white horse, the four horsemen of the apocalypse also. Yeah. Only one white horse better be a huge horse. Not sure why. Hadn't heard much good about the new Odyssey movie. Well, I will tell you, my wife and I saw the Odyssey on Friday. And I will tell you, be completely honest and upfront with all of my biases and all that. I have never in my life read Homer's Odyssey. So I do not know how close this is to the source material. I do not know, and I didn't judge it as such. I did not judge it based on, well, how much is it like the original? And let me talk about some of the casting controversies. Right, Zendaya's Athena, she was fine. She was in the movie for all of about 5 minutes, maybe. Then you have Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy. This one is a controversial one, and I can understand. Look, Helen of Troy, as far as I knew, and I'm not an expert on history by any stretch, so I could be completely wrong, but I always assumed that she was just Greek. Now, obviously, in this interpretation, she is African. Now, is that a problem? Honestly, it doesn't really. Helen of Troy has all. I actually counted, and Helen of Troy has about 14 or so lines in the movie. She's on screen for just a couple of minutes throughout the entire film. She's not a major part, to be sure. But she is mentioned to be the face that launches 1,000 ships because she is so beautiful that she was the reason for the Trojan War. And, Lupita is an absolutely gorgeous woman, so I think that that's a valid casting choice. Some people might find it offensive because they wanted a white woman there, but I would dare say it would be hard to find a white woman as beautiful as Lupita Nyong'o. I'm just saying, she is an absolutely gorgeous woman. Prove me wrong. Maybe you can come up with somebody who is a current actress who is more beautiful than Lupita, but I can't think of one off the top of my head. And then you had Charlize Theron. She was really good in it. You had, of course, Matt Damon brought his absolute A game to this. But as far as all the casting controversies, I did not have a problem with any of the casting. Lupita, it took me out for just a split second because, isn't she supposed to be Greek? Well, I guess maybe she is, maybe she isn't. I don't know. And that was the extent of it. There was only one shot in the entire movie where I was like, and that was a shot where they show, was it Ulysses? But the main character, as he and his men are on their ship, and it's one of those ships that has oars on it. So you have everybody in sequence rowing the boat. And the camera kind of pans up and he looks at the crew of his boat, and the crew are looking at him. And I was just like, wow, I didn't realize just how diverse the Greeks were, right? Because on his boat, there was an Asian dude, there were a couple of black dudes, there was a couple of Arabic dudes, there was a few white dudes. I was like, this is a really, really mixed up crew as far as that's concerned. And for a second, I thought, look at, I was thinking, the woke police are going to have a field day with this, right? People like Nerdrotic are going to probably scream about how terribly inaccurate this was. However, and this is kind of a big deal, that's actually fairly accurate to Greece at that time. Greece was a multicultural epicenter of the world. If you were to go to Athens, Greece, in ancient times, you would be likely to meet people from Ethiopia and the Far East and all over Europe, and it would just not be unusual to see a eclectic group of people. And so not necessarily everybody on a ship crew would have to be native Greek. So when I thought about that, I realized, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. This is not, multicultural washing of the story, because nowhere in any version of Homer that I've heard of, and maybe I'm wrong, but if somebody can tell me one, please do. But nowhere does it specifically state that these guys were all white guys. So it didn't bother me at all as far as the casting. So assuming for a minute that those things don't bother you, that those things don't freak you out, because if you are freaked out about the idea of a multicultural group in a Greek mythological story, okay, that's going to break you. But if that doesn't break you, if you're like me and you realize that, Greek culture was actually pretty multicultural, so there's nothing wrong with that. Once you get past that and you watch this movie, it's a 3-hour film. And I will tell you, it's been a while since I've watched a 3-hour film in a single sitting. Not only did I watch the entire film without getting up and going to the bathroom or anything like that, it didn't feel like 3 hours at all. This movie, even though it was not a fast-paced film by any stretch, but compared to most modern movies, it's fairly slow. It's not really an action film; it's a drama piece. It's a story about the relationship between these people. And how it's affected over a 20-year absence of Ulysses, and as he comes back and sees what happened to his kingdom. But my gosh, I gotta say, easily, this is the best movie I've seen since Avengers Endgame. Easily. It may be the best movie I've seen in the 21st century. And it's probably in my going to end up being in my, at the very least, top 10 movies of all time. This movie was incredible. I have said many times, and I stand by my prior comments, I've said that I think that Christopher Nolan is an overrated film director. I did not think that the Batman trilogy was all that great. Inception was interesting and it was fun to watch. Interstellar, an abomination to physics, in my humble opinion. But The Odyssey, my goodness, this was a great film. Something that I have not been able to say in a very long time. This was a truly great film. So, if you've been sitting on the fence about seeing The Odyssey, I highly recommend it. And I would also say, my God, see it in theaters. You want to see this on the 75-foot screen, not on your phone. This is one that is 100% worth the price of admission and the popcorn and a drink. It's worth it. And there are not many movies that I would say that about. So I honestly, I cannot recommend it enough. So please, I'm glad you asked about it because, I've been dying to talk to somebody. But now that, unfortunately with the whole thing that went down with Mr. Know-It-All and Law Reloaded, I don't, and unfortunately, as much as I love him, Danny is not the most reliable person as far as showing up for stuff. I got nobody to talk to about this stuff anymore. And so thank you for asking, Robert. I really do appreciate it. But yeah. And Stan says, sorry, apes. LOL, just trying to make the atheist argument. Someone brought up animals. I get it. I think I'll stick with the original Odyssey movie and TV series. Robert, do yourself a favor and see this movie. Look, I I do recommend movies from time to time, but I will tell you if you want to actually make a suggestion or actually judge me as far as my taste in films, go see the Odyssey. If you think that's a bad movie, then you and I have nothing in common when it comes to movie taste. I cannot think. Even though, and by the way, the Odyssey is not even my kind of film. You know, like everybody has their favorite type of film. For me, it's sci-fi all the way. Like probably my favorite, movie this year. And the funny thing is, we've had two great movies this year, which is amazing. But my favorite movie this year that I would rewatch just because it's my kind of thing is Project Hail Mary. Love that movie. Love absolutely love that film. But The Odyssey is a better movie. The Odyssey, I am seriously considering giving my first 100% 10 out of 10 perfect review. I cannot think of a flaw in the film. And that's saying something because I usually nitpick the crap out of movies. Vegetables are what food eats. That is an extraordinarily truthful statement. That is a picture? Question mark. I'm not sure what that is. However, I do have a question in the question tab, so let me go over there real quick. Ariel, thank you. So, by the way, haven't talked to you in a while, Ariel. Welcome, as always. I love seeing you here. Playing devil's advocate, and that's perfectly fine. Look, I'm not judging anybody for asking a challenging question. I'm not saying, oh, you believe this, because I'm not making any assumptions. I understand. Look, I try to play devil's advocate myself because it makes me sharper as far as my intellect. But playing devil's advocate with no true argument for atheism, I also may have asked before, is there the one argument that God was a manifestation of man and that God does not truly exist without man believing in God? So I have heard atheists argue that God is simply a man-made creation, right? And like you said, a manifestation of man. That God would not exist without men believing in God. And while that's an interesting premise, here's the problem. That's just an assertion. There is no evidence of this. Now, you can make the argument that there have been many gods that were manifestations of man, and you can demonstrate those. For example, when we look at, since we're just talking about the Odyssey, if you look at the Greco-Roman pantheon of gods, right? So they have the god of the sun, the god of the thunder, the god of the moon, the god of the ocean, so like, and Poseidon. While we don't see Poseidon in the movie, Poseidon is a big part of the story of the Odyssey because Poseidon's kind of pissed off at the main character and trying to stop him from making it home. And these were all what atheists today would call a god of the gaps, right? In that we don't know why something works, and so we create a god that does it, right? And so we don't understand lightning, so we imagine Thor is up there casting lightning bolts, or Zeus, or whatever god we want to create, right? We don't understand how the sun works, so we say there's a god called Apollo or Ra or whatever that represents the sun. And these gods are very quickly, as we become more intellectually aware of our world, we become, and science begins to do science, right? As that happens, we start to realize that these gods are false, right? And that they were clearly a man-made creation to try to explain something that at the time had no explanation. Now, does Yahweh fall into that category? I don't believe so. You know, I don't think when we talk about Yahweh and Jesus, and by the way, I know some people will argue that well, like I think what was it Robert and I think you and I talked about this before, but Jesus' name is not Jesus; it's Yeshua or Yeshua, depending. I don't know what since none of us speak the ancient languages and the ancient tongues. It's one of those things we don't know exactly how it's pronounced. But why do we say Jesus today? Because Yeshua translated to, I believe it's something on the, oh gosh, what was it? I used to know all the way it transliterates from language to language, but when it was translated from Greek or from Hebrew to Greek, that's to. All right, so let me see if I can find it with a quick search. Right. So Yeshua is how it is in Hebrew. So the literal the literal letter by letter translation of his name will be Yeshua. Right. So Yeshua translates to let's see. It went from that to Greek. In Greek, Yeshua is rendered, oh gosh, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Lysius, Lesous, right? And so from there, you go to the Latin Esus, which is Lesus, and from that, you go to English, which is Jesus, Jesus. And so all it is a translation from language to language to language. And it's the same name. It's just like, for example, my name is Michael. My name in Spanish translates to Miguel. In Russian translates to Mikhail, right? So, and so my name translates to many other languages directly. And so if I were some messianic figure and we were speaking to each other in Russian 2,000 years from now, you would be calling me Mikhail, not Michael. Anyway, long-winded answer. I still, by the way, don't know when you said, is that a picture, what you're talking about. So, well, you're talking about maybe the picture on my driver's license? Yeah, it's horrible. That's the picture. I wonder what kind of camera the DMV are using. Yeah, like 5 megapixels, maybe. Yeah, pretty much the same license design here. Yeah, it's terrible. And it looks like something just popped in here. Hold on. And this is Ariel again. Is it most likely possible that those that are atheists most likely had something bad happen to themselves and just basically lost faith or basically demanded that they have something but God? Said no to the demand, but then they say God said no to the demand. They say there is no God. I do think there's some of that. I think that there's a lot of what we call church hurt, right? People go to church, and let's say you're in a bad situation, right? And the bill collectors are coming after you, and you can't pay the rent, and you don't know what to do, and you're desperate, and you go to your church, and your church has money. I'm not talking about some little church with 50 people in it. You go to a mega church with 10,000 people, and they've got money out the wazoo. In fact, they have a whole ministry there just giving away money, and they give away millions of dollars every year to help people in need. And you walk in there, and they say, "Sorry, but you don't fit." Our qualifications for aid because you don't attend the church regularly enough, or you don't tithe regularly enough, for whatever reason they may give. And so you say, oh, so these guys don't even give a crap, right? Screw these guys, F these guys, I don't want anything to do with it. And so you walk away from it and you say, what a bunch of hypocrites. And this, unfortunately, and by the way, this happened in my own past. Not exactly like that, but I grew up in a progressive church, and that my parents were very, very active in, and I began to realize that the church itself, it was full of some wonderful, kind people. And they welcomed and loved everybody, and they were just wonderful, beautiful people. Really appreciated that. But they ignored much of what's in the Bible itself. Oh, sure, they understood the Sermon on the Mount, right? They understood love your neighbor. They understood the incredible beauty of Christ's sacrifice on the cross to pay for our sins. But what they didn't get was that we are, while we are saved by grace through faith, the way that you see the faith in another person is not some magical formula. It's not like, ooh, I can feel God on this person or something like that. It's through their works. It's through what they do that you see it. One thing that our pastor is fond of saying is that you are not saved by your works, but you are not saved from your works either. And so you absolutely need to show it through your works. If you're not doing anything, if you're not, and here's the problem. In that situation that I described, where, let me get back to my situation. All right, so I began to realize that the church that I was going to, yeah, they loved everybody. They, wanted to hold hands, sing Kumbaya, give her lots of hugs. But there was no accountability. There was no, there was nothing frowned upon by the church. For example, if a couple was engaged, let's say that a couple wanted to get married, and they went to the pastor and said, oh, we want you to marry us. And they sat down to do some premarital counseling. And you find out that these guys have been living together for the last 3 years. Pastor wouldn't even bat an eyelash at that. That was no big deal, right? And to me, that would be a big red flag, right? If I was your pastor and you were coming to me asking me to marry you, and I found out that you guys were living together, I would say, first, one of you needs to move out, and you both need to make a solemn pledge right now that there will be no more sexual activity until marriage is complete. And we're going to have a long talk with both of you separately, with appropriate counselors about, sexual responsibilities and stuff like that. Because that is not, we really don't take these things seriously. We think that, oh, it's no big deal. People are just having fun. And I saw this back in the 1970s when I was a kid. And while on the one hand, you think, Billy's got the cool parents that, let you, they let you drink or they let you smoke or whatever at their house. And so everybody likes their parents because they're the cool parents. But in the long run, the cool parents aren't doing the right thing. Right? So the cool parents are, in fact, harming the kids because they sit there and allow them to do things that are in the long haul harmful to them. And that's how the church was that I grew up in. The church was very, very liberal, and that not necessarily liberal politically. I'm sure that most of them were, as far as their voting habits. I'm sure they all voted for Democrats, but generally speaking, they were liberal in their application of gospel truths. In that the Bible was a book about how you're supposed to love everybody and cherish everybody and hug everybody, but there was no accountability, no discipline, no chastising sin, and in fact, very little talk of sin at all. And so I began to realize, oh, these guys they aren't really Christians. They just kind of like this one part of it, and so yeah, I don't like that. And I decided once I became old enough, and my parents were okay with it because my parents were very liberal parents, and that's just how liberals do things. So they say, oh, yeah, he wants to explore his frontiers and do his thing. Okay. So in exploring my frontiers and doing my own thing, I started attending a Roman Catholic church. Went to Roman Catholic church for a while. In fact, started taking the classes so that I could actually become a Catholic. Was talking to the priests there about potentially becoming a priest long term, and had a lot. And at this point, I'm like a young high schooler, and I'm sitting there talking to the priest on a weekly basis. Actually, I probably saw the priest like 2 or 3 times a week, and we're having some deep theological conversations. And the problem is that kind of like with the Methodist church that was very, very liberal, the Catholic church, well, they are, they don't, they talk a good game about some of their beliefs, but they don't really enforce their beliefs the way that the Bible says. I said, hey, the Bible says that if someone is, say, committing adultery in the church and they're found out, and that the people that, you say, if you find out your neighbor's committing adultery, you're supposed to confront your neighbor. If they refuse to repent of the sin, you're supposed to bring another church member and try to confront them as a group. If they still refuse, then you're supposed to get the priests involved, and they would be removed from the body of the church. And I said, why don't we do this? Why is it that there's no discipline in the church? And the priest looked at me right in the eye and said, because if we were to, kick out everybody that committed adultery, we'd have nobody left. And I was like, well, then we're doing this all wrong. We are absolutely doing this all wrong if that's the reason. And then I started asking, wait a minute, why are we praying to the saints? Why are we praying? We're praying to Mary, asking her to pray to God for us, right? And I get the idea is that intercessory prayer. There is examples of that in there are plenty of examples of intercessory prayer in the Bible. Basically, if I want intercession, it might be something like, "Hey, guys, I'm really struggling with something right now, and I need you guys to pray for me." And basically, having you guys praying to God for me, hopefully, and from my perspective, if enough of us appeal to God to intercede and help me with this situation, then God will eventually say, yeah, okay, what the heck, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with asking people to pray for you. However, I will say this: if somebody asks you to pray for them, don't just blindly say, "Oh, yes, of course I will pray for you. Let us get started. Dear Lord, let us please lift up our friend who is struggling," right? Because here's the problem with that. You need to know that this person is right with God. You can't just pray, "Okay, Lord, please fix this guy's finances. Lord, we just pray a blessing on his house that they'll, that they'll be able to pay their bills and blah 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 blah." Right? But what you don't know is that this guy is spending $5,000 a night gambling at the local casino, right? And then if he wins anything, he takes the money right over across the street to the strip club and is handing it out to the strippers like there's no tomorrow, right? You don't know that that's what's really going on, and yet you're praying for God to bless his finances. The guy's not being a good steward with his finances, and so you need to know that before you pray for this person. But we have no accountability, and so with no accountability, to me, it's like, that doesn't seem like the way the church is supposed to be when you read it in the Bible. And asking the saints to pray for you, but wait a minute. In the Bible, the saints are just everybody who is a Christian, right? When Paul refers to the saints, he's not talking about like some upper class of people that have performed miracles and done these wondrous things for the church. He's just talking about the members. That's just the word that he would use, the word that was translated to saint at least. Let's see, because let's take a look at what that is. We're to. All right, so trying to see here. The Greek word that is translated saint is hagios, which means set apart or holy. Saints are depicted as those who live according to God's will and teachings. The concept emphasizes the communal aspect of faith, highlighting the unity of believers. A saint is not an upper echelon of person that the church has to, have a committee and decide that this person is officially a saint. And I had a big problem with this. And so the more I talked to the Catholic priests, the more I started having problems with some of their doctrines, because I realized they were doing things that were not in the Bible at all and treating them as absolute dogma. Some of them, I think, inherently destructive, such as the policy that priests cannot marry. I think is a terrible idea. The priestly oath of celibacy is not biblical. Now, Paul does say in the Bible that it is best to be celibate, like he was. But then he immediately recognizes that not everybody has that gift. And so if you are unable to control the fire that burns within you, then you are to take one and only one wife, assuming you're male, right? So you're not to start a harem or anything, not like Superman. Anyway, let's get back to the chat and we'll wrap this up here. An ID card is a lot like a driver's license. Well, yeah, an ID card is a driver's license that doesn't allow you to drive. I think they switch it just printing us to just printing us in black and white. Yeah, I don't know why. I think the pictures look terrible, harder to make out. Just like North Carolina lawmakers have done away with any vehicle registrations and the little sticker one puts on their license plate, leaving it up to their DMV to come up with an alternative. Well, that's stupid. Just like here in South Carolina, there's no helmet law, though we have a seatbelt law here. Motorcycles are way more dangerous for survival rates for accidents after all. State lawmakers. Well, I mean, when it comes to those kind of safety laws, I have a lot of mixed feelings. I don't like helmet laws, and I rode motorcycles longer than most of you have been alive. And I do understand that, yes, from a safety perspective, everybody should always wear a helmet when they're on a motorcycle. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But I will also say, as an avid motorcycle rider for, oh gosh, 40 years, somewhere around there, the as an avid motorcycle rider for a very long time, there are times when you just want to be able to ride down that country road and feel that wind blowing through your hair and the bugs on your teeth and all that. There are times when that's what you really, really want. And it sucks that it's illegal, right? Because I think that people should have the right to do stupid things every now and then. I don't have a problem with, if you want to base laws strictly on safety and how many lives they could save, then honestly, let's, forget about seatbelts. And actually, here's the thing. Okay, so first of all, we should have a 5-point harness system in every car. That is 2 at the shoulder, 2 at the waist, 1 at the groin, to securely hold you in place. It's like a NASCAR, harness. And drivers should wear helmets. And in fact, if drivers were required to wear helmets, that would save more lives than motorcycle helmet laws, just because of the sheer number of people that die from head trauma in motor vehicle accidents. So they should have to wear helmets. They should have 5-point harnesses. And the speed limit should be, instead of, typically these days on freeways, it's right around 70 miles an hour. You make a federal mandate, the highest speed limit can only be 30 miles an hour to try and prevent fatalities. And if you're in the city, the speed limit has to be 10 miles an hour so that you can prevent fatalities if you hit a pedestrian. That would save a ton of lives. It would also make driving nearly impossible, right? So not a good idea. We can't base laws strictly on how many lives they will save, even though that's what a lot of the times the politicians try to use as their primary arguing. Same thing with the word bird. The Bible says bats are birds, but it was written eons before animals were classified the way they are now. Oh, yeah. Calling a bat a bird, I know some people make fun of the Bible because they misclassified bats. They forgot that bats were mammals. And it's like, mammals weren't a thing 2,000 years ago. So separating, and in fact, if there's no classification of mammal, if that's not even a word, then a bat would be a bird. It's just a warm-blooded, hairy bird. I'm reading a book about dinosaurs. I mean birds. Well, yeah, that's actually a funny thing. Tyrannosaurus Rex is probably just a giant chicken. But you are an expert on hot black chicks. That I am. Does she at least manage to do that? I'm not sure what that is, but if you're talking about my wife, I'm sure she does whatever it is that you're thinking. Why did the Bible have to have this the same definition as the modern day definition of bird? It doesn't, and it didn't. That's something called presentism, and something we do a lot with the Bible is that we forget that the Bible is an ancient book written by an ancient in an ancient society, and so some things were different just because of the time they were written, like bats being birds. The early 2000s, the Odyssey movie is more closer to the original Homer's original story, TV series I meant. Well, I've not seen it. Like I said, this movie was an absolute masterpiece. Oh, and I forgot. I see. Robert put into the question chat. Just like part of the Corner Fringes sermon yesterday was about God is an impartial God, where many believers in churches aren't impartial towards certain types of people. That is actually an interesting idea, is that if God is truly an impartial God, which uh, the way that he's shown in the Bible, assuming the Bible is the Word of God for a minute, and assuming that the Bible is true, that God is not a lying God, then it means that God is at the very least just. And that means that he's not going to judge people by anything that they are not responsible for. That's something that I've talked about before on this channel. So if you have never in your you live in the jungles of South America with a tribe that's never been exposed to Christianity or the Bible, and so you live your whole life never hearing about Jesus and the cross and all that. Are you going to be judged by God because, oh, you weren't a Christian? Now, I can't say I know for sure because the Bible's not explicit about this. But I think that I can infer from the Bible that you are only judged on what you are capable of choosing. And the Holy Spirit, the way that Paul talks about it, and I think this is interesting, is that the law of God is written on our hearts already. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? Well, it's exactly what many atheists try to argue all the time, which is that I can be a good moral person without God. Yes, you can, because God has put his law on your heart. So you know what is right and wrong. That's why that's something that we commonly call a conscience. But that's the Spirit of God in you kicking you when you're doing something wrong and praising you when you're doing something right. That's why you feel good about yourself when you do something really good. And that's why you feel guilty when you do something real bad. But what we can do is we can train ourselves to ignore that conscience. And so that we can start doing the wrong thing without the guilt. And once we get there, then it would truly take a miracle from God to bring us back. Wow, and I actually have a real IMAX 1570 theater within an hour drive. Well, if it's playing there, see it there. Even Tom Holland was good? Wow, yes, Tom Holland. Well, it's funny because it was the first time that, I didn't just say, oh, look, it's Spider-Man, I did it first, of course, because, it's Tom Holland. But no, Tom Holland's character, he's the son of the main character, and he is in a very precarious situation throughout this whole thing. And he is basically next in line to the throne, but nobody wants him to be king. Because if they just kill him and marry his mother, then they would be king. So, that's bad for him. And then there's where Ariel came into the chat 30 minutes ago. Oh, and I see there's another thing from you, Robert. So let me say good morning, Michael and chat. Hope you're all doing well. Thank you, Ariel. I'm so glad to see you. But in the question chat, Robert put, Corner Fringe's sermon was meaning that many churches and believers put certain classes of people ahead of saying dirt poor people, where God treats everyone the same no matter what. Well, what it does say in the Bible, so, within the body of Christ, meaning that as a Christian, in the eyes of God, there is no Greek, no Jew, there's no man, there's no woman, there's no slave, there's no master. The idea of this is that, yes, every human is equal. And by the way, where do you think the founding fathers of the United States got the idea that all men are created equal? Yeah, right there. And so it's this idea that humans are all truly equal that should make us not be so harsh with each other. We need to realize that no matter how much of a scumbag that person, I'll give you a real world example that most of you know about, okay? With the whole situation with Laura Reloaded and Mr. Know It All, for those of you that don't know, Nerd Fights as a show is pretty much officially dead at this point, in large part because Laura Reloaded is now paying Mr. Know It All to be a full time editor of videos on Laura's channel. Which is great for Mr. Know It All because, he can use the money, and it's great for Laura Reloaded because Mr. Know It All is a very skilled editor. And so that's wonderful for both of them. However, it left me high and dry. All right. And by the way, they did this without telling me while we were on break and coming up on we were supposed to go back to doing the show on Friday starting July 3rd. And we're coming up on July 3rd, and I'm all excited. And then I find out, oh, by the way, not going to happen. And I was furious. I was absolutely furious, stark raving mad. I was really, really, really pissed off. I felt betrayed, all that stuff. But the bottom line is, as much as I may want to sit there and say mean things about Lore or about Mr. Know-It-All or whatever, they are still men made in the image of God. And to God, they are no better or no worse than me. Right? Because, yes, it's true, what they did to me was kind of jacked up. But if I were to be honest, have I not done things just as bad or even worse? Of course I have. Have I not thought about doing things even worse than that? Of course I have. And so we need to be very careful about pointing the finger of wrath at somebody. Because as angry as I was over the situation, it was one of those things that made me realize, while it's a challenge, we are called by God to love all humanity. Now, I said some pretty harsh things to Lore and Mr. Know-It-All when this came down. And it may well be that we never talk again because of some of the words exchanged between us. And I would regret that. I hope that's not the case. But the last thing that I sent to, and I don't know if they ever even saw it, but I sent it to both Lore and Mr. Know-It-All, not in the same words, but to each of them, I let them know that I forgave them for anything and everything that they may have done. And then after realizing some of the, kind of mean things that I've said, I follow that up with a message asking them to forgive me for getting so angry with them. I don't know if they're going to ever see it, and that's up to them. But I at least wanted to put that out there. I wish them well, and I will have to struggle with that for a little bit. Just like I still struggle with other people that I felt have done bad things in the past, like Nerdrotic or Doomcock, And I get it, man. When you start getting YouTube famous, it can be extremely intoxicating. I mean, because for a brief time, I was on the verge of being YouTube famous, so I kind of got a taste of what that's like, and I'm kind of glad that I stumbled where they shot so high, because I think I would be a much worse human being if my channel had the kind of numbers that Lore and Erdrotic have. So I'm kind of glad that I failed, to be honest. But I also have to look at these people and recognize that these are all men created in the image of God, and therefore have a value that is equal to mine. And God wants everyone to go to paradise. God doesn't want anyone to go to hell. Just like Homer's story uncovered in the TV series, the Cyclops was a child of Poseidon, which was left out of the new movie. That is not left out of the new movie. It is actually stated in dialogue that the Cyclops is the child of Poseidon. It's not like a major plot point, but it is actually mentioned. If humans wipe this, but you know, oh, by the way, I do want to say this. Whether or not it catches, you know, because Homer's Odyssey, you would have to do a TV series that was at least 100 episodes to get every little detail right that's in the Odyssey. And I'm sure they didn't. You know, I'm sure there are things they cut out for time or edited or moved around or whatever for storytelling purposes for the TV show. I don't have a problem with that. That's adapting something from one medium to another, right? A movie is not a TV show, is not a book or an epic poem. But this movie is one of the best I've ever seen. If humans wiped themselves out for nuclear war or something, would God still exist? Yes, God is not contingent upon man. Does God exist in the absence of man? Absolutely. Would he create man again? Now, this would be pure speculation because, of course, I'm not pretending to be in the mind of God and have the perfect knowledge of what God would or would not do in any given circumstance. So let me put that out there as number one. We can speculate, but we are only speculating. However, I would say this. Would God, if man wiped himself out with nuclear war or something, would God recreate man? I think he probably would, based on what we saw with the Noahic flood. Remember, God was actually going to just wipe out everything and start fresh at that point. The only reason he didn't was because then he stumbled across Noah and said, oh, here's a guy that's worth saving. And so, otherwise, you know, who knows, you know, depending on how you believe it all happened, we'd have to evolve all over again. So key storyline points in Homer's Odyssey were left out of the movie. I don't know what story points you're talking about, so I can't really comment on it. But, you know, I still think the movie was great. A few days ago, I saw a trailer for the new Godzilla movie. Wonder what the new threat mentioned. What's the new threat mentioned in the movie? I have not seen the trailer yet. It's something I'm going to probably do right after this live stream. But you're talking about the Godzilla. Is it the Godzilla Minus Zero movie or the new Godzilla Monsterverse movie? Because as far as I know, both are in production. Is it a setup for other kaiju? Who knows? Well, things like TV evangelists can really turn you off. Oh, absolutely. That's a big... I think that the biggest cause of atheism in the Western world is probably misbehaving Christians. And when you see people like Kenneth Copeland and stuff out there preaching absolute nonsense, you know, then it's no wonder that people turn away from Christ. Willie Vist 904 says, by the way, you still, there is a question section if you want priority, Willie, so you don't have to wait a half an hour. But Does you have the argument from animal suffering? Why would an all good God make a universe that required all seemingly unnecessary suffering, millions of life evolving? That is an interesting argument. But let me say this before I address the issue of animal suffering. That is not an argument for atheism. That's not an argument against theism. That is only an argument about the personality of God. So you say, why would an all good God make a universe that has all this? And the key word there is seemingly unnecessary suffering. Now, if and I'm sure that and I don't know if you're actually an atheist or you're playing devil's advocate or what here, but I would say this: number one, there's only one way to know if suffering or pain or anything like that is truly justified or even good. There's only one, let me put a ridiculous example, but one that will make sense here. So I walk into the room. There's a man standing there. I shoot him in the head, and he dies. Is what I did right or wrong? Well, your instinct might say, well, obviously, what you did was wrong, because that's murder, and murder is wrong. Okay, but context here matters, right? So you find out that when I walked into the room, the man was holding my wife hostage. And so I shot him to save my wife. Well, now, is what I'm doing good or bad? Well, you might say, well, no, now what you're doing is good. You're stopping a criminal in the middle of his criminal act, and you're saving your beautiful wife, and so that's obviously a good thing. I say, great. But then, what if I tell you that the man that I just shot and killed, if I had not shot him, he would have married a beautiful woman on his own, had kids, and one of his kids would grow up to be the greatest religious leader of all time and bring hundreds of millions of people to faith and basically change the world and the attitude that the world has about religion. What now? Good or bad that I shot him? Now it becomes a little trickier, because in the situation at hand, you could still make the argument that it's completely justified from the knowledge that I had available. But on a cosmic level, if I knew what his potential future was, does that change the ethics? It kind of does, doesn't it? And the only way to really know if whether or not suffering, death, all of that is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so in fact, let's take it one step further. If I do not intervene and kill this person, then he would murder my wife and me. Right? Good or bad? Well, you'd probably say bad. But what I didn't tell you is that if he had not murdered my wife and me, let's pretend we're younger and everything, we were going to have a child that was going to become a brutal, evil dictator and cause World War III and destroy the world. Well, now, the fact that he killed me would be a good thing, right? And so you could actually make the case that this guy coming in and murdering me and my wife was a good thing, and it would be a bad thing for me to intervene and stop him from murdering me and my wife. But all of this goes to say, the only way you can know whether or not suffering is necessary, whether or not suffering is ultimately good, is to be omniscient. Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Willie, and Nowhere in the Bible does it mention animals having souls, animals having some kind of eternity beyond this life. So, as far as we know, animals' existence ends at the point that their life ends, and they don't really have an intellectual connection like humans do with others and the world around them. But it seems terrible that, oh wow, animals suffer sometimes. Like I remember when my wife's previous dog, that she had, a cute little Pomeranian named Puka, and she got sick, and for several days she was just in agony, and then she finally passed away while my wife was holding her in her arms. That was rough, right? That was one of those things that you look at that and you're like, come on, God, what did Puka do? We don't know. Is there a reason? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Maybe when it comes to animals, because animals don't have souls, maybe God doesn't care. Maybe he does care. Maybe animals are, go to paradise just like humans, and their suffering and their attitudes about suffering affects whether or not they can go to heaven or they're condemned, just like with humans. And we don't know. We just, that's the problem. We don't have any information on it. So without any information, without being able to be omniscient, it's not a problem that I think an all good God, why would he make a universe that required all this seemingly unnecessary suffering? Well, we don't know why. You can ask him when we get there. Maybe he had a good reason. Maybe the suffering of the universe is because of the fall of man. Maybe the suffering in the universe is what makes the universe a beautiful place. Because, you can't experience true joy without experience suffering. That's part of the reason. Have you ever noticed that people that are born into wealth, and I've known a few people like this when I was younger, people who are born into wealth don't appreciate money at all, right? People who are born into wealth, people who have millions of dollars in their trust fund by the time they're 10 years old, right? People who will never ever have to worry about how much a gallon of milk costs. Those people, they don't experience the same kind of joy that I experience just because I managed to make my car payment on time 1 month. They'll never know that joy. Now, that might sound silly, but on a larger scale, that's also true. You cannot experience anything good without being able to experience at least the equal in bad. You cannot have pleasure without pain. It's simply not possible. And and even though people say, well, sure you can. You could just create a world in which nobody ever suffers and everybody feels healthy and great all the time. And see, now you have pleasure but no pain. Except that if you were to live in that world, right? Let's say you were born into that world, to where life is always pleasurable, there's no suffering, there's not even death. Do you think that you would feel good on any given day? Because keep in mind, everything going perfectly is just normal. It's not, there's no such thing as having a good day. There's just having a day. So would, to me, it seems like a all good God that wants his creation, particularly if humans are the point, the pinnacle of his creation, as it would seem to be from what we see in the Bible. And at the very least, humans are the pinnacle of his creation on earth. Which, by the way, see Disclosure Day if you want a little bit of talk about that kind of a concept. That'll blow your mind. But if humans are the pinnacle of his creation, maybe he wants us to suffer a little bit so that we can grow and experience joy and and love and peace. None of which can you feel without agony and suffering and there we go. All right. Check, check. 1, 2. All right, we're back. So, I don't know if you guys heard. So I was saying that the long game argument, and by the way, the fact that you got Street Preacher and Marian Ananur, the fact that you used the question thing to get my attention, that's perfectly okay. I appreciate it. Thank you. Anyway, so God can see the infinite future from the infinite past and vice versa. Well, there is no infinite past, but that's a whole other discussion. While it seems cruel now, when we're where He is, it won't. And then the answer that Willie gives, and by the way, Willie, I hope you're around. That's what I was saying before I found out that I was muted. I hope you're around and that you will answer me as far as my long-winded answer. Really doesn't answer anything. God has reasons we don't see, essentially. You'd have to assume that conclusion. You couldn't arrive there without already wanting to believe it. No, you absolutely can't, because you see, the question becomes, first of all, you're trying to create a question that assumes the opposite, right? You would say, well, why would a good God create a world with suffering? How about the question, could a God both love his creation and allow suffering at the same time? That, I think, is a more reasonable question. We're not trying to ask a pointed question that suggests that God is somehow evil or that God is, incompetent or whatever. Instead, we're simply asking the question, is it possible that God is in fact good and allows suffering? And I think that it is possible. You may think it is not possible. But the problem is that, well, you would have to demonstrate to me why, based on what, so kind of like what I was talking about with the person coming into my house to murder my family. Same thing with, you have the deer in the woods suffering, and you say, oh my gosh, a tree fell on the deer and it's suffering and it takes 8 hours to die, right? Oh my gosh, there's no good that could possibly come from that. However, that deer, once it dies, becomes the food of some vultures. And those vultures happen to consume the deer meat and then fly away and then they poop on the ground somewhere else, and that fertilizes that ground, making a beautiful pasture where before it was just dirt. And so, thanks to that deer and that vulture, now we have some more beautiful meadowland. So you can definitely see that it is possible for all these things to work in the long term for the greater good. However, if you just want to assume the worst and say that God, is evil because He allows evil, well, then I think that you are presupposing the answer. God does like to give everything He created trials, from humans to animals to bugs to plants. Well, I don't know that that's true, but I would say at least with humans that is certainly true. I cannot say with animals, bugs, and plants that He is necessarily putting trials on them. However, keep in mind, and this is something I think is rather interesting and something that we forget about when we talk about the role of God and man and all that, especially when we start talking about this kind of argument, like this problem of suffering. And that is, in the book of Genesis, it is very clear that God is sovereign over the universe, right? God is the king of the cosmos, quite literally. However, He gave man dominion over the earth. So the earth is not, at least not entirely, God's domain. It is man's. And so as far as how well the ecosystems are getting along and doing and all that, well, maybe man should be doing more to preserve our natural environments and ecosystems and to prevent suffering in the animal world and all that. But we don't. We don't care. But we want to sit there and blame God because we're not doing anything, right? We want to blame God for the fact that kids are starving in Ethiopia when we're not willing to hop on a plane and fly to Africa and help dig a well, or to help give out some food, or to at least donate a little bit of money to one of those groups that does that. And Lee, in the question section, doesn't human free will cause suffering? Absolutely it does. Absolutely. Because humans have dominion over the earth, and man is a cruel beast. Speaking of the Catholic faith, that's why McDonald's came with their filet of fish sandwich, because the Catholic, because of the Catholic times where they don't eat regular meats. Well, yeah, you're supposed to only eat fish on Fridays if you're Catholic, for whatever reason. The Pope one year decreed the fish doesn't count as meat, so you're fasting if you only eat filet of fish sandwiches, because you're not eating meat, which I think is a bunch of bull crap. Mary says to Willie that logically, if there's an entity that lives beyond time and in it makes sense, they would be able to tell which outcomes are best. I agree. If God knows past, present, and future all as one, which He would have to, if He is the author of time, then He would have to exist outside of what we call time. So if God can see the past, present, future all at once, then He knows what will happen with that deer suffering in the woods. And He also, like I said, gave earth to us, and maybe He tweaks things every now and then to get His mission out there. But for the most part, He lets us have the earth and do what we want to do with it, for better and for worse. God says in the Bible that He doesn't test anyone with evil. Who is right, you or the Bible? I'd like chapter, if you're going to say, just to be clear, I don't mind that type of argumentation, but in order to address it, if you're ever going to say, God says, and then throw out a quote. You got to give me chapter and verse so we can look at it in context. I'm a big believer in examining the context. So when God says that he doesn't test anyone with evil, what is your reference for that? McDonald's didn't want to lose that Catholic revenue. Of course not. And Ariel says, I am right. I am always right. Even when I'm wrong, I'm right. Yeah, I thought I was wrong once, but it turned out I was wrong about being wrong because I was right. That's okay. The problem isn't that it isn't convincing at all. I could just say my magic friend Gilbert is all-knowing and will reward you if you die if you accept him. It isn't convincing. Yeah, but that's not, you see, that the problem is that is a gross oversimplification of what Christianity is. Christianity isn't, hey, there's a magic guy named Jesus who's all-knowing and he will reward you when you die if you accept him. There's more to it than that. Jesus doesn't want you to, like when you say accept him, do you understand what that means? Like, we're not talking about, oh, well, because with your magic friend Gilbert, right, what does accepting him mean? What does that entail? Does it just mean that I accept that Gilbert is a real guy and that he's magic? Okay, fine. That's easy. Except that doesn't do anything, right? If you accept Jesus, there's a lot more to it than just saying, okay, Jesus existed. That's step one, but it's not the final step. And in fact, and it's kind of funny because Jesus' own brother, James, wrote in the Bible that, if you believe in God and all that, great. So do the demons in hell. And guess what? They're in hell. So you got to be very careful. It's not just, not just acknowledging his existence is not going to do anything. Let's see. You almost seem trollish. You ask how an all-good God allows so much suffering over such a long time, and when you get an answer, you alter God's definition to be some fairy. Well, now I'm going to read his answer, but I mean, yes, a lot of times people move the goalposts like that because it's easier than actually addressing the answer given. Like I don't know if I'm caught up to that point yet in the chat, but I still haven't heard will he actually answer my statement about it yet, but hopefully he does. Let's say a God exists. Okay, a God exists. If this God allows millions of years of pointless suffering, I would hesitate to call him all good, at least. Do you agree? Okay, so let me say that. I'll say that. Okay, so yes, if God allowed millions of years of pointless suffering, I would not call him all good. You're 100% right. Now, how do you define pointless suffering? Because and keep in mind that the only way to know if the suffering is truly pointless would be to be omniscient. So let's hear your explanation. Street Preacher says outlaw is salty. And then hypothetically, sure, our problem with suffering is not our problem with suffering is not pointless to start with. I would agree with you there. I can grant that human suffering isn't pointless, but I imagine a lone deer stuck under a tree. That's funny. I gave that same example. Now I know exactly where you got it from. And that's the funny thing. I use that example probably from the same source as you. And, the reason I use it is because atheists love to use it, even though it's, not a particularly compelling example. If you can look at it dispassionately. The hard thing is you say, oh, look at the poor little deer stuck under the tree and starving to death. Oh no, the poor cute little fuzzy animal is starving and it's hard and it's mean and life is no, and he doesn't get any ice cream, right? I get it. That's a great appeal to emotion to try to show what is an adorable, cute little animal going through a very difficult time before it dies. But that doesn't mean its death is pointless, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't produce some good in the long run. It's just that you don't see it. And because you don't see it, you say, well, it must not exist. But that's the only way you can say that definitively is if you are omniscient, and you are not. At least, I don't think you are. It seems to be from these examples that God doesn't care about his creation. He doesn't mind suffering. Doesn't care? Why would you say that? Let me ask you something. I don't know if you ever play video games or anything like that, but let's say that you play. There are lots of civilization type games, right? Or no, let's go one step better. Those city building games. My brother Prey 5 used to love playing that one city game. I even have it. I just haven't played it in forever. Where you start out with a little bit of a budget. You build a couple of roads. You zone it out for housing and stuff, and people start building their houses there. And then you build some infrastructures. You build an electrical power plant and stuff like that. And you're just managing your city and having fun as it's growing and becoming, hopefully, a thriving society. And then you realize, oh, shoot, I need to zone some space in order to build a landfill because I haven't done that yet. And yet I have the entire city grid zoned out for residential. So, and there are houses everywhere. So what do? Well, you clear out the zoning of one section, which destroys all the housing there, and then you rezone it industrial and you put your landfill there and stuff, right? Well, except that you've just killed how many people, right? How many people did you just wipe off the face of your, whatever the name of your planet is, just so that you could put a landfill there without even thinking twice about it? Oh my God, you're so cold and cruel. So basically saying South Carolina should do away with their seatbelt law and leave it up to the individual how important their personal safety and life is worth. Yes. Look, I'm not saying that you shouldn't put your seatbelt on. I'm all about buckling up, right? I was about buckling up long before there were seatbelt laws because, yes, I'm old enough to remember long before there were seatbelt laws. And there were some cars that just didn't have seatbelts in them because they weren't required. But you know what? If and like, I'll tell you, I have a good friend. He's a pastor. Great man. Hates wearing a seatbelt. Absolutely hates it. In fact, his car died, and he had to get a newer car. He doesn't drive any new car, but he had to get a newer car than his previous one. And there was one thing he really despised about that car, and that was that it made an annoying dinging sound if you didn't put your seatbelt on. So yeah, look, if he refused to wear a seatbelt and one day he died in a car crash, you know what I would say at his funeral? Well, he died doing what he loved, driving without a seatbelt. But it would be sad that he was gone. But maybe, and this is where you get that get good from the bad. Maybe someone at his funeral who was never wearing seatbelts started wearing seatbelts because of what happened to him, and then 6 months later they get into an accident that would have killed them, but they had their seatbelt on. There is no proof that God just lets them just die. For all we know, they're in heaven or going to be eventually. Well, that's the thing. We don't know. It is an unknown. I would grant you that. But so when I think about these types of questions, it's not about, hey, why does God do X? Because I can't answer why God does X. But what you can ask, I think, reasonably is it possible for God to both love his creation and allow suffering? Is that at least possible? And I think I demonstrated earlier that yes, it is, but I still haven't heard an answer to my explanation of it, which Willie, please do. I know you're talking to the other people in the chat, which is great. I appreciate the interaction there, but I would love to hear what you thought of what I had to say about it since I was addressing you directly. We don't know if the deer isn't asking for salvation or praying to God just because we don't understand the deer's language. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, we genuinely do not know if animals have that intellectual ability. I don't know that they do. But if it's kind of an interesting question. If animals do have the intellectual ability to understand God, to understand the existence of God, then can animals be saved? I think that's an interesting question. And then Willie retorts with, okay, fair enough. But you agree we have no reason to believe that to be true over any other religion? It's just speculation. Okay, now I don't even know what you're talking about. We have no reason to believe that to be we have no reason to believe that to be true over any other religion. It's just speculation. So now you're changing it from asking about animal suffering to asking why I believe in Christianity over other religions. Is that what you're really doing? You're just switching the goalposts because you've given up on trying to argue over suffering? If you have, fine, but just admit it. And thank you so much, Kyle Cullen 2520 with a $5 super chat. Haven't seen one of those in a long time. Thank you, my friend. Live long and prosper, or as they say in Southern Vulcan, live long and perspire. But thank you, my friend. And let's see. I don't know about the deers near you, but they sure don't seem to worry about themselves or spiritual philosophical matters. They don't seem to have the capacity for that level to understand. I would tend to agree that they don't appear to, but here's the problem. All that's subjective. The only way to know would be to be Professor X and to be able to read their thoughts. But we're not Professor X and we can't read their thoughts, so yeah. I'm sure you do, and I highly doubt the Bible. Okay? That's what I was worried about. He'd just come across as Peter Parker. Huh? Oh, you're talking about Tom Holland and the Odyssey. He was definitely not just Peter Parker wearing a costume from Greek mythology. He felt like a different character. Tom Holland did probably his best performance that I've ever seen. And actually, the funny thing is, Zendaya was great. Matt Damon. Oh man, Matt Damon was awesome. There are many times through this movie that you completely forget that you're looking at Matt Damon. He is really good. And yeah, it's just, what's her name? Anne Hathaway is his wife. She's absolutely wonderful. Everybody in this movie brings their A. There is not a single character where I'm like, oh man, why did they cast that? Like if you've ever seen, Bram Stoker's Dracula with Keanu Reeves, and you're like, oh, what a great movie, except for Keanu Reeves. Why in the world did they cast Keanu Reeves in a Dracula movie? Dude, we must totally kill this bogus creature of the dark. It just didn't work, right? All right. Would have been good. I don't. Would have been good. I don't think Danny liked Odyssey. Yeah, I have no idea what he thought. I haven't talked to Danny since before the Odyssey came out. I texted him and said, "Hey, dude, where you been?" And he just said, "Work," because we were supposed to do a show because we both saw a really funny movie, and we were going to do a nerd fights about it, and yeah, he never showed up. So, yeah. Forgive and forget, talking about the whole situation with me and the guys. Look, forget, forgive and forget is not in the Bible. Okay, forgive is in the Bible. Where we get forgive and forget is that God forgets our sins, right? That God does not keep a record of our sins. And that is a good thing, right? Because if he did, we'd all be pretty screwed. Likewise, when we forgive somebody, like let's say that you did something that really pissed me off. You took my hamburger when I wasn't looking and ate it, and that really made me mad. It means that, hey, you know what? If when I forgive you, I'm going to say, you know what, Stan, that was really jacked up that you ate my hamburger. I was really looking forward to eating that hamburger, and you took it, but I forgive you. It's water under the bridge now, and let's move on, right? And we move on, right? And forgiveness is really a gift for the person giving the forgiveness rather than the person that's getting it. Because the person who's giving the forgiveness, you get to let go of it. You don't need to be angry about it all the time, right? So it's like, okay, it's just done. Now, let's say that a week later, I'm gonna enjoy a nice hamburger, and you happen to be at my house. You know what I'm not gonna do? Leave the hamburger out, because you might take it again. So, absolutely, am I going to hold that against you that you took my hamburger? No. I'm never going to mention it to you again. But I'm certainly not going to have a hamburger lying around anytime you're in the area. So, no. So as far as what happened with Lord, Mr. Know-It-All, 100%. I forgive them both. I will not hold it against them. But I will not depend on them to produce a show with me anymore. And I think for good reason. Maybe that's the animal's plan. Could be that they don't worry about what we think of them, and they could feel like humans have it wrong and aren't as free as themselves. You give all the same non-understanding to all animals, like whales, dolphins, and humans' best friend, dogs, and then cats. Yeah, it's actually interesting because, animals do seem to have different levels of intelligence, right? So, yeah, do dolphins contemplate God? Do whales? Do dogs? Well, dogs are stupid, let's be real. Cats think they are God. Well, I didn't realize it's such a rough party. It's it's one of those things that happens. And I was obviously not happy about it. And I said some things I truly regretted. I'm not going to repeat them here. But I said some things I truly regret. I really hate when people say, "Oh, I didn't mean it." Oh, I meant it. I just shouldn't have said it. I'm sorry that it happened. But at the same time, walking away from it, I am not going to, sit there and pretend that, it was that I did something to them. I didn't. At least not that I know of. They haven't told me that I've done anything to them. And they tried to, I'm not going to get into it, but yeah. They wronged me. I let it go, but I'm not going to put myself in that position again. Not to make accusations, but I had a feeling Mr. Know-It-All was using AI to write his video scripts. He was using the term load-bearing about plot points. Load-bearing is a term AI tends to use. Well, look, I am not okay. So this has nothing to do with the way we part a company or anything like that, right? We're just criticizing their body of work and trying to be objective about it. Knowing a little bit of the inside baseball that I know. Look, Lore and Mr. Know-It-All are a great pair because both of them are big supporters and advocates for using AI in content creation. And in some respects, I have to admit, I'm a little relieved that things went south between us. Not because, I mean, I miss them as friends. I truly do. And I hope that we get to rebuild those friendships at some point. But I don't want to be an AI content creator. I genuinely don't want that. I want the content that I put out there to be written by me, to be voiced by me. If there's animation involved, to be animated by human beings for the most part. Yes, you use algorithms to calculate some animation movements and stuff, but I don't want it to be, hey, ChatGPT, make a scene where, Captain Kirk and Spock make out or something. I'm not going to do that. So and I'm certainly not going to ask ChatGPT to write a script for me for a video. If I was willing to do that kind of stuff, I would have been back up and running some time ago. In fact, I'll tell you, one of the things that Mr. Know-It-All wanted me to do, and I considered it briefly, in fact, I struggled with it, to be honest, was he has access to this one system that it's a voice cloner, but it's a nearly perfect one. Like you could make an entire video using your own voice that you never said a word, you just typed it. And people, and Mr. Know-It-All has let me hear some that he has done for various commercial works that he's done, not on YouTube, but in other places. And I'd say, yeah, listening to it real quick, I would not know that was not Mr. Know-It-All's voice. Now, if I stop and really listen to it, okay, I can tell. Just like I can tell when Lore is doing one of his scripts that's written by, I don't know what he uses, but I just say ChatGPT, but I don't know what AI he actually uses. But I can tell when the script is at least partially written by it because he will always say over and over, not this, but that. And it's something, this is something ChatGPT also does, kind of like using the word load bearing. So, it'll say like, the Klingons didn't invade the Federation. They decimated them. Something like that. And if you listen to Lore's videos, you'll start to catch that. And so when you hear him say that like several times in one video, yeah, it's a ChatGPT video. I mean, it's probably I assume it's voiced by the real Lore. I don't know if he's using one of those voice cloners at this point, but it is what. But I didn't want, and anyway, all this going back to is I didn't want to be I won't. My content when I start getting it back up there is never going to be AI content. Never. I've made that decision. It will always anything I say on my channel will be from me. It's not going to be from ChatGPT. Even if I use some kind of AI generated music or I use some kind of AI generated image to help me make my point, the voice is going to be my voice. The script is going to be my script. It's not going to be, written. I'm not working for a machine. just to make money off of YouTube to get views. Not going to happen. Okay, so the new Toho Godzilla movie saw a trailer sequel to Minus Zero. Yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to that one. Just like the doctor who taught us messing with the timeline has dire consequences, such as the River Song episode about killing Hitler. If she had been successful, would probably have wiped out the universe. Well, yeah, that's the funny thing is that, like, if you could time travel and wipe out and kill Hitler before he was born, then what would happen to the world when you got back to your time? Would you exist? Could you exist? Because think about it. I'm assuming that all of you were born sometime after 1945. So if you kill little baby Hitler, right? He's got that cute little mustache as an infant, and you just, you do the Thanos thing that that Rhodey suggested. So you kill little baby Adolf, and what happens? Well, let's see. My dad was born in like 1932. My mom was born in 1940. So they would still exist probably because their existence doesn't seem any way directly related to Hitler's existence. But World War II never would have happened. And so even though both of my parents were born before World War II, a lot of what happened in their lives after World War II would have been different in some way. The economy in the United States would have been different. And so maybe my mom would not have been able to move from New York to California. Or maybe she would have been perfectly happy staying in New York. Or maybe she would have decided to move to some other state. And so she never would have met my dad. Maybe my dad would have stayed in school and studied and become a professor instead of dropping out and going into the Korean War. Would the Korean War have even happened if World War II never happened? So you see, a lot of things would be different. And with all those changes, chances are I'm not going to exist. Because even if my parents do meet, the circumstances are going to be at least slightly different. And all it takes is a millisecond of difference at the time of conception for it to be a different sperm that got to that egg, and poof, I don't exist, and there's someone else that may or may not look something like me. So that's pretty much everything would be different in 2026 if you killed Hitler back in like 1910 or whenever he was born. It turned out okay that Steve Rogers, a.k.a. Captain America, traveled back in time and had a wife and family. Nothing bad happened to time. Ah, so you think. Doomsday is coming, my friend. Doomsday is coming. Doctor Who, fixed points in time must happen. And that's where the audio cut out a second time. All right. From what I've seen here, the X-Men mainly responsible for creating the apocalypse in X-Men 97. So if they didn't travel back in time, no apocalypse, perhaps. It seems that way. My wife and I've watched like the first, 3 episodes of X-Men 97 Season 2. I will say so far I like it better than Season 1, but I'm not a big fan of Apocalypse, so we'll see where it goes. Well, if you didn't kill anyone when you bulldozed the residential area, you probably did make a lot of people homeless. Well, yeah, that's true. But yeah, and did you care? What about if you ever play The Sims? Think about this. You play The Sims, and then you turn your computer off. Did you kill all your Sims? Or, hey, if you're playing a game where you're just trying to save the world from demonic invasion in like a Doom type shooter, and then you stop playing, what happens to that world? Do the demons win? Does everybody die every time you turn your computer off? How is Robert Pattinson in that movie? Robert Pattinson, again, just like everybody else, brought his A game. He was an incredibly slimy, evil, terrible guy. And he played the part very well. He was the foil to Tom Holland's character, and a very effective one actually, because Robert was, obviously has a few years on Tom Holland, and it shows. And that was part of it, because this guy was a man and Tom Holland was a boy. And so, relatively speaking, Tom Holland was not quite old enough to take the throne for his father. And this man was old enough to take the throne and wanted to marry his mother so that he could. Street Preacher, I was hungry. I hadn't eaten in a week. Well, too bad. Just like last night's MeTV movie, it was the original Swamp Thing movie made by Wes Craven. I found out last night that while making that movie is when he came up with Nightmare on Elm Street. I did not know that. We only care about the cute animals. What are you? I'm a seal. I swim around and do cute human things with my hands. You are free to go. What are you? I'm a cow. You're a baseball glove. Get in the truck. Well, not to mention a really yummy steak. Does the Swamp Thing movies fall into a specific category as elements of different genres, I think? Swamp Thing, I think, if done right, which Swamp Thing so far has not been done right, not in any kind of motion media anyway. Swamp Thing, I think, would fall mostly in the horror genre. But, we haven't really seen a good Swamp Thing yet. Lee says, been a while since I saw the video of lore and drag you used to show. Oh, yes. And, I will be honest, out of respect for lore and Mr. Know-It-All, I won't be showing that stuff in the future, because I don't want them to think I'm doing it out of spite for them. And because with what happened, I don't need to drag any mud, so to speak. And unfortunately, it seems like that challenger with the wonderful question of suffering just left without ever commenting on my answer to the problem of suffering. Talked to you guys a lot about it, which I appreciate you guys' conversation there, but just abandoned my answer, which really kind of disappointed me. I'm not saying I'm angry about it. I'm just disappointed that once again, when faced with a genuine answer, they run away. That's what atheists unfortunately have a tendency to do. They'll ask what they think is a brilliant gotcha question, and if they get the kind of answer they want to get, they'll engage. The kind of answer they want to get is basically ignorant, the deer had it coming, or something. I don't know. But when you start actually answering in a clear, logical manner, they don't want to have that conversation. And we wouldn't have them as villains for the Indiana Jones movies. Not sure what you mean there, how that works. The butterfly effect, exactly. Oh, the Nazis, we wouldn't have them as the villains, yes. I shouldn't have said that word, but yes, you're right. Just a question, Apocalypse versus Samson, but Samson has the donkey's entire leg bone. If you're talking about Samson from the Bible, I would have to give that to Apocalypse. Apocalypse has got a lot of powers besides just being strong. And from what we've seen of his strength, Apocalypse's strength dwarfs Samson's. So even with the entire donkey leg bone, I don't think that Samson has much of a chance against the likes of Apocalypse. And Lore and Drag is not AI. That is true. In fact, you know what I would love? I will have to do this sometime. Is make an AI version of that, just as kind of a joke. Maybe once I can get back on speaking terms with Lore and Mr. Know It All, I'll do something like that. But not until then. All right, guys. So thank you for hanging out with me as always. Thank you for being patient with me. I know that some of you that have been supporting me on Patreon have left because I haven't produced much. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter about that because I haven't produced much in a very long time. I'm hoping that will change in the near future. I do have some exciting things to come up. Let me announce one thing real quick while I got you here. I know you guys are very kind and very graceful, gracious, I should say. And so you don't make fun of me in some ways that I know you could and would hurt, and I appreciate that. One of those things is my teeth. I know that my teeth are messed up. I know that basically, if you look at my mouth, I look like a meth head. It's terrible. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not sitting there trying to say, oh, woe is me. I've been treated unfairly. I have my sob stories about it, but that's not what this is about. In 9 days, assuming that things go according to schedule, 9 days from now, on the 28th, I will be going in for surgery. And they are going to extract. You may notice that when you see me, you don't really see my upper teeth. They're there, and they're actually pretty good because most of them are fake. But my lower teeth are what you see just because of the shape of my jaw and everything. And they look at an absolute mess. So when they're going to knock me out, they're going to remove everything that's still there on my lower jaw, which there's not that much besides what you can see. And they are going to replace all of those teeth with an implant that is much like a denture but stronger. And that will become my new teeth. And now that means that if I'm able to talk at all that Sunday, 2 weeks from now, it will probably be difficult. I may slur my speech a bit because I won't be used to the new teeth and I'll be in pain from the surgery. But I will still show up at least for a few minutes and say, hey, everybody, how you doing? It's great to be here. But I'm going to do my best just to say hi at least. But it's something that I've needed for a long time for my confidence. And honestly, one of the reasons that I don't do just videos where I'm talking to the camera, like where I'm sitting right now, is quite honestly because I'm embarrassed when I look at myself. And my teeth are a big part of that. My weight is another big part of that, but that's going to take longer to deal with. But I am working on that as well. So hopefully, after the 28th, you will see me with a new set of teeth. And the funny thing is, I actually go in and I get a temporary set of teeth on that day. And then, like a few weeks later, after my gums heal from the surgery, they take those teeth out and put the permanent ones in. So we'll see how that goes. I'm very much looking forward to it and also very much dreading it at the same time. Miss Moneypenny just showed up. Good to see you, ma'am. I hope you are doing well, even though your son is so hard to get hold of. Until later, everyone, stay out of trouble. Don't get caught. And Madam President Penny is here. Yes. Well, take care, Solitaire. You and your family a wonderful week, God willing. I certainly hope so. As far as your teeth go, you can claim to be a Brit. That's true. I should just claim to be British. And then they'll say, man, you have such beautiful teeth. I recently found out there's no air conditioning in Europe. Well, then I sure as hell ain't going to Europe. If someone changed the past, so World War One happened. I assume it didn't happen. We probably would have never gotten on The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. That is true. Miss Money Punny is sending emojis of, I don't even know what those are. It looks like 2 feet and a shield, but I'm sure that's not what it is. I've seen videos of people from Europe that came here for the World Cup. No AC in Europe. No, thank you. Good luck on the surgery. We'll be praying for you. Thank you so much, Ariel. And then Malfi says never. Are you saying never pray for me or never get oral surgery or never say never again? Which, by the way, was a horrible movie. Unlike The Odyssey. The Odyssey was great. Go see it. Please listen to me. In fact, I'll tell you, this is how bad I am with the teeth. You may notice in some episodes of Nerd Fights, I tried to conspicuously keep the microphone right in front of my mouth like this so that you don't see my teeth. That's how much I've been self-conscious about it over the last few years. So I am very much looking forward to getting my confidence back. By the way, I'm just stalling, hoping that Malfeas is going to tell me what the never was that I'm missing. Did you get the Trojan horse popcorn container? No, I wanted to, but I couldn't afford it. I really did want to, though. Yeah, it's nice. And I actually liked the Trojan horse in the movie. They did do a little bit of a different. Maybe somebody else has done it in a previous movie. I don't know. But this particular. Oh, and that was another casting choice. I know some people were pissed off about. Elliot Page is in this movie. For those of you that don't know, Elliot Page is the male persona of Ellen Page, the former girlfriend of. What's her name? Ellen DeGeneres, right? So, I think that's who. Yeah, but anyway, so then Ellen Page, turned her vagina inside out, so now she has a thing that I guess roughly resembles a penis, and she had her breast cut off. So that she looks more. She basically looks like a scrawny little old man, and she's in this. Well, I should say he is in this movie, and so is that a problem? No. I mean, I recognized him when I saw him on screen, but the casting fit the part, and so it didn't bother me. And I think some people get worked up over stuff like that. I didn't care. And if you care, you think the character is bad just because the person was born a woman, then you got bigger problems. I'm not saying that it's that. I don't believe in transitioning. I think that's a mistake for the most part. But at the same time, I'm not going to judge a person just based on what gender they were born with versus if they were surgically altered to look like another gender. Only problem I have with my teeth is one tooth in the back is crooked. Oh, to have back teeth again, that'll be so nice. I don't think Ellen Page was ever Ellen DeGeneres. No, Ellen Page became Elliot Page. And Ellen Page was Ellen DeGeneres' girlfriend, if I remember correctly. But I could be wrong about that. I thought she was a lesbian that was with Ellen DeGeneres. I don't know. I get my celebrity crap mixed up because I don't really pay that much attention to it. But she was Leo DiCaprio's female acting partner in Inception. Yes. She was also Kitty Pryde in the X-Men movies. Ellen's been married to Portia de Rossi forever, the girl from Arrested Development. I don't know anything about that because I don't care. They got worked up because of changing gender. Do people know what the Greeks did back in those days? Are they upset with all that? Well, I mean, obviously, man, I will tell you, there's some brutal stuff in this movie that I think a lot of people didn't even catch. Like, there's a scene early on in the film where they show. Now, oh, by the way, another one that's in it is, oh gosh, what's his name? Ah, oh man, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Latino actor was in The Happening. He was in Spawn as the clown. Let's see. Who played the clown in Spawn? Oh, come on. There we go. Yes, John Liquid Zero. Yes, John Leguizamo. He's in it, and he was great. I was kind of expecting him to stand out, kind of like, well, what's a Latino guy doing there? But he was actually really good in this movie. He plays like the old sage of this kingdom. But at the beginning of the movie, John Leguizamo and Matt Damon have a scene, and it's a flashback where they're talking, and basically it starts out where he's talking about this old mangy dog that is that Matt Damon's character is the only person that this dog likes, right? And they do a flashback, and this is probably why Danny didn't like the Odyssey, because this was a rough scene. And they have John Leguizamo and Matt Damon are sitting there having a casual conversation while John is examining these puppies that were just born. And he's looking the puppy over, and he's like, "No, no good," and tosses it over a cliff. Right? Just really casually. Does it with like two or three dogs while they're having this conversation. And I think that there wasn't that much reaction from the audience, and I think it was because they didn't quite realize what was going on, that he was killing these dogs. And there was definitely some cruelty to dogs in this movie. That's not the only bit. There's some other stuff that happens to the dogs that's terrible. And so for some people, that's really tough. But man, was it a good movie. Paige also played the female character in the Umbrella Academy. Well, she ain't playing any females anymore, and that's for sure. The black actor cop from Sanford and Son and later on Room 227 just passed away. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, Dan didn't like the Odyssey. Like I said, I'm disappointed that he's been hard to get a hold of, because I would have liked to have talked to him about it on Nerd Fights or something, but because maybe we could fight about it if he was up to it. I would love to fight someone over the Odyssey right now. I know that most of the Phantom Menace types are probably saying how terrible it is. I haven't looked at any of their videos, but I'd be willing to bet the Critical Drinker thought it was terrible. And I would love to have that conversation. Anne Heche was, yeah, you're right. That's who I was getting her confused with. Damn, I didn't know he was playing a Spartan. Yeah. Well, they weren't Spartans, but they did, they visited Sparta. But yeah, look, the Greeks were very, keep in mind, the Greeks very much believed they had very strong ethical beliefs, but among those beliefs was not the idea that animals were equal to humans. And so tossing a baby puppy off a cliff was no big deal. And now do consider this, the Spartans had a reputation for killing their babies that weren't up to snuff, that were humans. Although I don't know that that's actually true. I'm not a historical expert. Nice that Danny wasn't collateral damage. Yeah. Most of the FNT guys gave it a 5 out of 10. FNT, I assume you mean... I don't know, what does FNT stand for? Is that a new thing? I honestly don't know what you mean when you say FNT. I'm trying to think of what FNT stands for. It's going to drive me crazy. So you got to tell me, buddy. You got to tell me. Um, uh, yeah, I was in 300, which was a graphic novel. Yeah, but I don't think it was actually true. Um, I'm trying to see. Oh, Friday Night Tights. Okay, yeah, the Friday Night Tights crowd. Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry. The Friday Night Tights are it's kind of like how I felt about the Trump cabinet. These are just a bunch of people that are willing to suck on Nerdrotic's dick in order to try to be popular. And the only reason I say that, look, I'm sure that Babyface and all the rest are great guys, but the simple truth is the only reason I'm not on Friday Night Tights anymore is because I refuse to do that. And some of you guys have known me long enough to know, yes, I was a regular on Friday Night Tights a few years ago. And I actually helped Nerdrotic grow as a channel. And I'm glad he's successful. But we have a basic ideological difference that we couldn't get past. And yes, I know exactly what Friday Night Tights is. Like I said, I used to be a regular on that show. And it was a fun show to be on back in those days when Nerdrotic would actually allow me to be the voice of dissent every now and then. But then he realized that he'd rather have nothing but sycophants around him, so I'm gone. Which, hey, no hard feelings. He's got to run his show his way. It's his show, and he can choose to run it any way he wants to. Unfortunately, Nerd Fights was kind of dependent on having nerds to fight. So unless I find a new group of nerds that wants to commit, and I'm telling you, I'm not doing it again unless I find people that are willing to commit 100%, because I am not going through this crap again. I'm too old for this crap. No more. If somebody wants to co-host and actually put in the work that it takes to help set up the show and do all that stuff, great. But until that time, Nerd Fights is officially on hold. But I'm going to try to start doing movie reviews and stuff on the Salty Plus channel at the very least, and start doing theological breakdowns on this channel as time permits. It is impressive they get like 15,000 live. Well, yeah, I mean, they get a good audience. And I will tell you, if I was getting 15,000 people watching my live stream, I would stream for at least an hour every night. And spend at least 4 or 5 hours a day, just looking through all the stupid websites that are, the tabloids of Hollywood, where you find out all the scoop information on stuff. So I say, hey, here's the latest rumor on Doctor Doom, and talk about, like the time travel implications of Doomsday and stuff. He found a formula that seems to have worked for better or for worse. Yeah, I'm happy for him. My problem is that his formula is all based on hate. I don't have the equipment to help out with things like Nerd Fights. I just have a smartphone. I appreciate the offer there, Robert, but hey, I mean, if it's meant to happen, it'll happen. I'll find somebody. But like I said, I'm not gonna go through this again. If somebody is, man, the way that things went down, me and Mr. Know-It-All, that hurt. And I've already had things like this happen multiple times in the past. And I understand it's kind of a nature of the business where people get a better deal going somewhere else, and so they go. I'm not going to be the stepping stone for the next person anymore. Salty Plus channel, yeah, that's the name of my other channel that I want to get off the ground, hopefully soon. When I do, don't worry, Lee, I will talk about it here. Oh, and Doomcock's video title says he hated Odyssey. Of course he did. So now you're up on the gossip. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, if I could make a ton of money just talking about the latest gossip in Hollywood, sure, I'd do it. But I wouldn't do it in a way that's like so negative, like the Friday Night Tights group. Nor would I be a suck up like John Campea or Robert Meyer Burnett. I would just give my honest opinions on things. And I guess that's why I will never be huge like John Campea or Nerdrotic. Nerdrotic hated the new Doctor, who for having woke stuff in it, completely ignores the third Doctor's era of that series had woke stuff in it. Well, that's because Nerdrotic has selective memory. A lot of people in the former Fandom Menace do, where they, like people tend to think, like I'll give you a great example. The Phantom Menace, and I did this too when I was a part of that group. The Phantom Menace has this tendency to talk about how we don't hate women, why we love Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor. And it's like, okay, great. But you know what? If Terminator came out today, if there was no Terminator franchise in existence and it came out today, you would hate it. I'm talking about not you, I'm talking about the people in the Phantom Menace. Why? Because look at the story. All the men are incompetent or evil. The only person who survives, of course, is the woman, who is a Mary Sue because she just happens to be good at everything that she tries for the first time, and everybody loves her because Sarah Connor is just so great, right? And, and the whole thing is, look, James Cameron is a hardcore feminist, and that's why notice that that's just what he does, and that's okay. Same thing with Ellen Ripley. Look, all the guys on the Nostromo were either greedy, incompetent, evil robot, or some combination of those. I mean, there's only one that was a robot, but you know what I'm saying. And there was another woman on there that was brutally killed by the alien, but at the same time, she looked kind of like a guy, so it's okay. And so, and then Ellen Ripley just becomes a complete badass in the next movie with no explanation. I mean, yeah, sure, she was pissed off that the alien got Newt, and she had just formed this bond with Newt. But are you seriously telling me that a woman with literally 5 minutes of military training was able to strap the futuristic equivalent of an M16 and a flamethrower together into a combined weapon and take on an entire horde of aliens, including the Queen, which no one had ever seen a Queen before? So they would hate that too. They would just say, "Oh, it's a bunch of woke nonsense." Critical Dream would say this movie is just about the message. That's what they would do. So yes, they look back and they love Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley, but the simple fact is Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley represent everything that they hate. Just like Trek Yards, you pretty much get ignored unless you donate super chat money. Yeah, and I don't like that either. I swore that I would never do that, and I mean, at this point, there's really very, very little chance that I would ever be so successful that I would have to even think about it. But at the same time, it doesn't. I don't think about it, to be honest. All right, so it's kind of funny. So I'm looking at. Let's see. I don't even know what is. Go to. I got real quick. I'm gonna take a look. Go to Rotten Tomatoes. Go on. Why in the world, when I search for Rotten Tomatoes, does it go to frickin' Amazon like I want to buy some Rotten Tomatoes? Jeez. Stupid computer. RottenTomatoes.com. That's what we actually want. All right. So yeah, the Odyssey has got a 97% audience review and a 95% tomato review. So I don't know what these guys are looking at, but nobody that actually is seeing the movie is agreeing with them. The simple fact is, people that are actually going to see the movie are really enjoying it. But look, Asmongold is a wonderful example of the kind of crap that I'm talking about here. Let me show you. Share screen. This is I just did a quick search for the Odyssey. And notice, here's his thumbnail where you see the black woman and the trans man, which, by the way, never appear together on screen. And Lupita never looks like that in the movie at all. And so this is obviously just an AI-generated image. But, and Asma goes, oh, this is just typical, crap from these kind of guys. Michael Knowles said, the Odyssey is not what I expected. Well, I'm sure he'll say he hated it because, trans women and stuff. Let's see. The Critical Drinker, the Odyssey, oh dear. A lot of people just saying critics left stunned like it's, whatever that's supposed to mean. So, yeah. I would like to be doing honest reviews of this stuff, but I just don't have the time. I wish I did. They would hate the G.I. Joe cartoon from the 80s if it came out today. One of the female characters threw a big 200-pound brutally guy through the door. Well, of course. Yeah, you get it. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. I've already gone way longer than I should have, and I will talk to you guys, if not before, next Sunday.